Well, the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology will come to order. And the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. But before we do, I just want to take a point of personal privilege to say to our former chairman of the full committee, Mr. Walden, glad to see you here. And good morning and welcome to today's hearing on defending America's wireless leadership. What we are talking about today impacts Americans in every part of our country, and properly managing our nation's spectrum resources is an important responsibility. These public resources fuel our economy, enable communication services, and power important federal missions. As technology develops, it is important that spectrum policy keeps pace and efficiently maximizes the use of these finite resources by unleashing innovation and protecting our national security. Over the past year, this committee worked to improve U.S. spectrum policy. Last Congress, I co-led the Spectrum Innovation Act to accelerate commercial access to the lower 3 gigahertz band and extend the FCC Spectrum Auction Authority. This range of frequencies is prime mid-band spectrum that will improve mobile broadband speeds. The legislation included a measure championed by our good friend from Kentucky, the chair of the Subcommittee on Health, that would modernize our federal spectrum management process by establishing an incumbent informing capability at NCTA to enhance commercial access to federal frequencies. Last week, the House passed our full committee chair's legislation, the gentlelady from Washington, to extend the FCC's auction authority to May 19th, and we're going to be talking about that, I'm sure, today, and what happened last night. Unfortunately, the Senate failed to pass both the Spectrum Innovation Act and Chair Rogers' extension measure. We must now work quickly to agree on a long-term extension of Spectrum Auction Authority that preserves congressional oversight of spectrum policy and directs auction proceeds to reduce the deficit and fund important initiatives. I look forward to continuing working on this important issue. It is also important to note that good spectrum policy is good for our economy. Our leadership in 4G added billions to our GDP, created tens of thousands of new jobs, and led to the development of the app economy. Leading the world in future generations of wireless services ensures greater investment in next generation technologies. This means we will have more job and development opportunities right here in the United States. But the economic benefits do not end there. Auctioning spectrum resources also yields significant monetary benefits. Recent FCC auctions have netted over $100 billion for the U.S. Treasury, money that can be used to reduce our nation's deficit and fund important priorities. In addition to making more licensed spectrum available, we must also look for opportunities to make unlicensed spectrum available. The majority of American internet usage happens indoors, and the use of unlicensed spectrum, such as Wi-Fi, plays a crucial role in providing connectivity for homes and businesses. One report estimates that unlicensed spectrum generates over $95 billion per year in the connected technology market. Good spectrum policy is not only important for our economy, but is essential for American economic and national security. American leadership on spectrum policy can lead to the private sector setting technology standards that benefit American technological leadership. It means trusted companies that develop economies of scale, create jobs, ensure that the technologies of the future promote American values and priorities. As we develop our spectrum policy, we need to keep a number of principles in mind. First, we need a balanced approach between licensed and unlicensed use of spectrum. Both licensed and unlicensed spectrum are key to bolstering U.S. technological leadership, and each provides economic benefits for the American public. Next, we need to ensure we are utilizing every tool at our disposal to make spectrum available for commercial use. Advances in technology have made spectrum sharing more feasible, which will become more important as the process for identifying bands for auction exclusive use becomes more complex, lengthy, and expensive. Finally, we need to restore trust in the interagency spectrum coordination process. While federal missions must be protected, the executive branch must speak with one unified voice so that spectrum management decisions are not called into questions. As we look to extend spectrum auction authority and develop our spectrum policy, we need to ensure that all stakeholders are involved early in the process and that when decisions are made, agencies respect those decisions. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. And again, I want to thank all of our witnesses for appearing before us today. And at this time, I yield back and will recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from the 7th District of California, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To say this hearing comes at an unprecedented time is no overstatement. We're here today under alarming circumstances during a lapse in the FCC's auction authority, something that's never happened before. Simply put, this is a failure, and it was a completely avoidable failure. 2 weeks ago, the House passed a bipartisan bill to extend the FCC's auction authority through May 19th. This extension was intended to give us time to continue negotiating while preserving the vital authority of the Commission. Unfortunately, that bill fell on deaf ears. Not only did the Senate decline to vote on the bill, but it declined to vote on any extension. This is in part because senators have been receiving conflicting messages from the executive branch, a problem that has been plaguing administrations of both parties for years. A little more than 2 years ago, I sent my first letter to the incoming administration. It was a letter to then President-elect Biden urging him to develop a unified approach to spectrum policy and a clearly articulated process resolving interagency disputes. I'll be entering this letter into the record. It's just as relevant today as it was when I sent it 2 years ago.
No objection.
As I noted in the letter, more intensive use of spectrum has the potential to cause friction among federal agencies and commercial users. And to some extent, this is unavoidable and healthy. Thoughtful debate about how to best utilize our limited spectrum resources will lead to better outcomes and more efficiency. But what can start as collaboration can quickly turn to conflict. When disagreements do arise, it's vital that all agencies are aware of administration policy and understand how to provide feedback in a constructive manner. But when this process breaks down or doesn't exist, we end up where we find ourselves today. The consequences of this lapse hold the potential to be severe and far-reaching. It undercuts economic growth and long-term national security. Companies with service footprints across the country are eager to put spectrum they acquired in the recent 2.5 gigahertz band to use, but this lapse jeopardizes that. T-Mobile alone is waiting for the FCC to approve over 7,000 licenses with a collective value of more than $300 million. In my district, they're waiting on 5 licenses that could to use, supporting home broadband and connecting underserved areas. But of course, the problem just doesn't stop there. The global race to 5 and 6G is still quite hot. Satellite broadband service is taking off, and Wi-Fi is set to make strides that will be massive for consumers. If the U.S. cedes ground to our global competitors in any one of these spaces, the consequences can be measured in American jobs and national security. On the heels of the Mobile World Congress, we should all be reminded of just how competitive the global wireless communications marketplace is. If the United States and other market economies aren't setting the pace for global harmonization, standard setting, and innovation, we create a vacuum that China will happily fill. And while the FCC's auction authority isn't alone responsible for these issues, letting it lapse sets a dangerous precedent for our governance values. Throughout this debate, people have asked me, would letting this authority lapse really be that bad? My response has always been, I'm extremely concerned, and I think you should be too. I'm concerned about the impact on licenses waiting to be assigned, the slow erosion of longstanding jurisdictional boundaries, and the United States standing as the global innovation leader. But I also think there's cause to be hopeful. This subcommittee has shown a bipartisan willingness to tackle tough issues that reinforce U.S. leadership, like extending the FCC's auction authority, for example. So I believe we have a chance to continue that track record to promote economic growth and national security. First and foremost, we need to ensure the federal government is a driving force in maintaining a healthy spectrum pipeline. That means reasserting the NCTIA's role as statutory manager of spectrum and developing a unified administration approach to spectrum policy. We need to keep the U.S. as anchor of innovation to stay ahead of our global competitors. I really want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I'm excited to dive in for what will be a timely and productive conversation. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back, and at this time, the chair will now recognize 5 minutes the chair of the full committee, the gentlelady from Washington.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A special welcome to the former chairman of this committee, Mr. Walden, and it's great to have your portrait on this side of the hearing room. Thank you to the witnesses for providing your expertise today. Today's hearing on defending America's wireless leadership will help inform the Energy and Commerce Committee's work on spectrum policy, which is crucial to maintaining U.S. economic and national security. For the first time ever, the FCC's Spectrum Auction Authority has expired. On February 27th, the House passed bipartisan legislation led by myself and Ranking Member Pallone to extend FCC's authority to issue spectrum licenses until May 19th. This would have given Congress enough time to come to an agreement on a more comprehensive package addressing many issues in the communications and technology space. For reasons unknown to me, certain senators decided to risk U.S. wireless leadership over a date change. A date change. It's unacceptable. We must come together and develop strong spectrum policy here in the United States that is informed by our values that support human flourishing and innovation. We cannot afford to cede leadership to China and other authoritarian countries who abuse their technology to suppress freedom and assert command and control over people's lives. I urge the Senate to act swiftly to pass H.R. 1108 to extend the FCC's auction authority through May 19th so that we can come together and pass a longer-term solution to this issue. It's the Senate's only option on the table right now to get us back on track. Make no mistake, getting this right will be key to defending America's wireless leadership. For decades, American policies rooted in promoting economic security and competition have yielded breakthroughs in wireless technology. 30 years ago, Congress and the FCC pioneered a bold new way to manage spectrum by auctioning spectrum instead of giving it away through a lottery system. This light-touch regulatory framework has brought billions of dollars into the U.S. Treasury through fierce competition and ensured that entities who have a spectrum license invest in technologies that utilize that spectrum as efficiently as possible. This approach has fostered innovation in everything from faster broadband speeds, precision agriculture, self-driving cars and vehicles, and smart manufacturing. While the demand for commercial spectrum continues to rise, so do the needs of our military, our border agents, and our researchers. In each new generation of technology, we find innovative solutions to balance these needs and utilize spectrum resources in a way that fits our nation's best interest. Spectrum policy is crucial to our national security policy, and we must stay true on the principles that have enabled our success in wireless technology, including by continuing to make spectrum available for commercial use. But our future economic competitiveness cannot rest on our past success. The Chinese Communist Party and other adversaries seek to undermine U.S. leadership, and they will stop at nothing for their domination. China, Russia, and other authoritarian countries have put forward a competing vision for technology built on a foundation of surveillance and control. State-backed companies seek to write the rules of the road that would use wireless technology to suppress free speech, surveil their citizens, and thwart the economic competitiveness of the United States and our allies. Their governments use top-down, command and control policies to make spectrum available on a moment's notice. They provide prescriptive regulations and guidance to where and when state-backed entities should deploy service. That is not how the United States operates. We believe in private sector innovation, and spectrum policy is at the heart of technological innovation. If we do not take a leadership role in writing our wireless future, China will. And writing our wireless future starts here at home with comprehensive spectrum policy. I look forward to today's hearing. It's extremely timely as we again remind individuals in the Senate on the importance of America's spectrum leadership. Thank you, and I would like to yield to the lady from Florida.
Thank you, Chair Rogers and Chairman Latta. Just as a point of personal privilege, I'd like to recognize a very special guest today in the room with us. Yesterday, she was at the White House receiving the International Woman of Courage Award. This is Brigadier General Bolar. She is the first general of the Mongolian Armed Forces. I met her several months ago. I met her several months ago in Mongolia at one of our training facilities, and she has been an inspiration not to her own country, but to women and girls all across the world. So thank you so much for being here today, and thank you to the chair and chairman for allowing me a moment to introduce her. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And the gentlelady from Washington yields back. At this time, the chair will now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Latta. And it's good to see Chairman Greg Walden here today. Good to see you. Spectrum is one of our country's most underrated and economically valuable natural resources. For the last 3 decades, Congress has given the FCC the authority to make these airwaves available through the use of competitive bidding or auctions. Granting the FCC this authority has served both the public and the nation well, and today the U.S. is a global leader in delivering 5G, advanced Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and other next-generation wireless technologies to consumers across the country. And at the same time, spectrum auctions, which have raised over $200 billion for the federal government, have helped fund important public safety communications priorities. Yesterday, for the first time, as my colleagues have mentioned, since the agency gained this authority 30 years ago, Congress failed to extend it when the Senate refused to act. The House did its work. We unanimously passed a bipartisan bill introduced by me and Chair Rogers last month to extend the Spectrum Auction Authority to May 19th. Our legislation would have prevented this lapse in authority. Now, I must say, I'm often a critic of the Senate, so I was not surprised that the Senate did not pass the House's bipartisan bill. They have a basic problem passing any legislation. In case any of you didn't know that, I'll reiterate it. But we cannot give up, and our work continues. And that's why I'm pleased that we're here today in a bipartisan fashion to shed some additional light on how our airwaves benefit consumers on a daily basis and keep Americans safe both here and abroad. Now, some Americans may not know that wireless calls travel over spectrum. It's therefore the essential building block for connecting family and friends, providing access to emergency services during times of need, and delivering education and health services to Americans around the country. Without spectrum, we would not have wireless emergency alerts, the app economy, smartphones, messaging services, the Internet of Things, drones, and so many other things. Many of these technological advancements were developed by American innovators because the U.S. was on the cutting edge, pushing the limits on how spectrum could be used in new and exciting ways. And these are remarkable achievements of services people rely on every day. But our country's past performance in aggressively deploying wireless technology does not guarantee future success. Simply because our nation led the world in providing consumers with access to 4G wireless technology and Wi-Fi does not mean that we'll achieve the same result of 5G, 6G, or Wi-Fi 7. And the stakes could not be higher. Chairwoman Rogers mentioned this, the failure to replenish the commercial spectrum pipeline and extend the FCC auction authority risks our nation falling behind our counterparts across the globe, particularly China. And that's because, in producing cutting-edge consumer innovations and enhancing our national security capabilities, we have to be ahead of China. Unlike the United States, the Chinese Communist Party does not govern with the fundamental values of democracy, free speech, and human rights in mind. So time is of the essence. We can't rest on past successes when China has already reportedly made 3 times as much spectrum available for 5G compared to the United States. Now, leading the world in advanced wireless technology must also include ensuring that these advancements are delivered equitably to all Americans, regardless of income or zip code. Unfortunately, too often rural, tribal, and low-income areas are left behind as next-generation technologies are deployed. And leaving these areas without these essential services denies them the many benefits that these technologies bring to others, including job and educational opportunities, health services, and so many other things that we've all come to depend on. Fortunately, programs like the Affordable Connectivity Program that was established in the bipartisan infrastructure law are helping connect these communities and the families living in them. The Affordable Connectivity Program has been incredibly successful since it was rolled out, connecting nearly 17 million families to high-quality and affordable broadband. In fact, every single member on this subcommittee on both sides of the aisle represents thousands of families that are benefiting from this program today. And this is especially important to highlight given that low-income families are more likely to rely on a smartphone and a mobile plan than a home broadband subscription. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. Obviously, we have a lot to do, and with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman, the balance of my time.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and that concludes our opening statements. We'll now hear from our witnesses today, but the chair would like to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. And again, thanks for coming to testify before us today, because again, this is a day that you've heard from several of us already that how important it is, especially with our Spectrum Auction Authority. Today's witnesses will have 5 minutes to provide an opening statement, which will be followed by a round of questions from our members. Our witness panel for today's hearings will include Mr. Brad Gillen, Executive Vice President with CTIA, the Wireless Association, Mr. James Assey, the Executive Vice President with NCTA, the Internet Television Association, Dr. Monisha Ghosh, professor at the University of Notre Dame College of Engineering and former FCC Chief Technology Officer, and Mr. Clete Johnson, Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And at this time, we'll start. I'm also going to apologize about my allergies. As soon as they opened up that plane door the other day, 10 minutes later, they're here. But Mr. Gillen, you are recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Matsui. And on behalf of the U.S. wireless industry, thank you for having a hearing on our favorite topic, spectrum, even if it's a bad day for spectrum policy. It was actually 50 years ago this year, a U.S. engineer walking down the streets of New York made the first phone call with one of these. We led the world in wireless that first day, and we lead today. And that's because of American ingenuity like that. It's also because of American investment. The wireless industry invested just $35 billion just last year, 4 years of record growth. That has benefited Americans with 5G 1.5 times faster than we benefited from 4G a generation ago. The other key, as you alluded to in the opening statement, is this committee, your leadership. 30 years ago, you created the FCC Spectrum Auction as the best way to allocate spectrum for commercial use. It's been replicated around the world. It even won the Nobel Prize. It raised an astonishing $233 billion for the U.S. Treasury. It's helped drive everything we do from 2G to 3G, 4G to now 5G. Now, spectrum policy gets way too wonky, way too fast, as that last sentence indicates. At its core, spectrum is the fuel. It makes this go, and as a number of the opening statements alluded to, it increasingly makes our economy go. We're projecting over 4.5 million new jobs this decade thanks to 5G innovation, from manufacturing to healthcare to agriculture and more. It's also creating entire new industries like 5G Home, a new fixed broadband solution that is bringing more choice and is helping close the digital divide. The two fastest growing home broadband solution providers today are not fiber companies, they're actually wireless companies. So that's the good news. It's actually the great news. We're really in a good place. The challenge is we are almost out of fuel, spectrum, at exactly the wrong time. You can see, it's always easier with pictures. On the first slide, you can see on the left-hand side how much more data we use from 2010 to 2021. It's in the purple. We use more and more each and every year. Where we are now at starting the 5G economy here, we're going to have growth 5 times more over the next by 2027. That is staggering amount of growth. It indicates just how much more we're going to use all these devices. And the challenge we have as a nation is we do not have 5 times the amount of spectrum to build that cliff. In actuality, as you've already identified, we have 0 more spectrum coming. And that really is the challenge we face. There are no FCC spectrum auctions planned today. And that's particularly important with respect to something that we call mid-band spectrum. FCC Chairwoman Rosenworcel calls it the ideal blend of capacity and coverage. It is. It goes far and it carries a lot. It's the key to what we need to do. The challenge is today, our spectrum allocation, as you can see on the next slide, is not in balance. When it comes to this key mid-band spectrum, We have 12 times more of it assigned to government users. We have 7 times more to our licensed and Wi-Fi friends than we do that little blue dot that's assigned to 5G today. We hope we can work with this committee to address this imbalance, because we see other countries doing that right now. On the next slide, you can see what's happening around the globe. Other countries are moving more quickly to get 5G midband in folks' hands, and this is also part of they want to supplant U.S. leadership. Make no mistake, they see what is meant here, and they want to replicate it back home where they are. Currently, our deficit is over 300 megahertz. That's roughly 2 major FCC auctions. In the hatch marks, you can see by 2027, that deficit will grow to over 500, absent corrective action. China has plans to aggressively move forward and could have over 400% more spectrum than available to the commercial sector in the United States by 2027. Now, a number of the solutions of how we fix this, you've already alluded to, and it was great to hear. The 3 things stand out in our minds. The first is, today is the first day in the last 30 years the FCC does not have the basic tool to run auctions. That's an unfortunate thing. We need to quickly, and thank your leadership for all you did to preserve that leadership. We need to get the FCC the authority back. And as key in doing that, the second piece is we need to have a pipeline of auctions to go with it. The FCC needs auctions to actually make this go. This committee in 1997, in 2006, and 2012 designated specific auctions along with auction authority. It's critical to our success in the past and can be so again. Accenture has identified 3 bands that we believe are prime candidates for future use. Welcome the chance to talk about those today. And the third, it really goes to we need better coordination. We need to empower the FCC and NCTA to speak with one voice. They need to call balls and strikes and be the experts that they are. Too much of the challenges we've had the last few years is we've been looking backwards. We're relitigating past disputes, not looking forward as to how all of these things can push us forward, can help grow the economy, our economic security, our national competitiveness, and our national security. There's very little things Congress can do other than spectrum policy to really move this country forward. We look forward to working with you, and thank you for having us today.
Well, thank you very much. And Mr. Assey, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Latta, Chairwoman Rogers, Ranking Member Matsui, and Ranking Member Pallone and members of the subcommittee. My name's James Assey, and I'm the Executive Vice President of NCTA, the Internet and Television Association, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this important topic. You know, over the past decade, the cable providers have invested over $172 billion to build, upgrade, and extend fiber-rich networks all across America that reach over 100 million homes today with gigabit technology. In the future, we'll see that capability increase as 10G technology rolls out. But the reason I'm here is because the wire really only tells part of the story. The proliferation of internet-enabled devices, the consumer's unyielding desire for data has fueled cable's investment in seamless connectivity. For over a decade, Comcast, Charter, and Cox have deployed millions of hotspots to deploy cable's secure Wi-Fi service. Smaller cables like Midco are using wireless to extend the reach of broadband in rural communities. And most recently, cable providers are offering highly competitive mobile services at attractive prices that deliver significant savings to customers. Comcast and Charter, each with over 5 million subscribers, are the fastest growing retail wireless companies in the marketplace, and Cox has just announced the launch of its mobile service in January. As this subcommittee considers how best to manage the spectrum resources, I'd like to just focus on 3 points. First, demand is going to rise, and we have to rise to meet that challenge. Faster broadband, more users, more devices, a wealth of innovative applications will feed consumers' endless appetite for data. Network investment and technological innovation will help us meet those demands, but promoting robust, seamless connectivity all the way down to the device will also require renewed efforts to support commercial use and balance the needs of government users. Fortunately, Congress has long recognized the importance of a spectrum pipeline. The FCC and NTIA play key roles in identifying and studying new bands for commercial use, and NCTA strongly supports their continued coordination to identify additional spectrum and develop new strategies. Second, we have to have an all-of-the-above approach to spectrum management that includes exclusive licensed, shared licensed, and unlicensed spectrum models. These models are complementary. Exclusively licensed spectrum gives a single entity the exclusive right to use certain frequencies. It's used primarily by traditional wireless carriers, with the three largest carriers controlling 78% of all licensed spectrum below 6 gigahertz. Shared licensed spectrum is an innovative way to enable commercial use in federal spectrum bands without moving incumbent government users. It was adopted in the FCC's framework for commercial broadband radio service and supports government use on a priority basis, with commercial use managed through dynamic sharing with licensees and general users. With $4.6 billion collected from the auction and over 285,000 base stations deployed, the CBRS approach demonstrates how a shared spectrum model can bring new spectrum online, attracting a diverse range of bidders to usher in new competition and support new commercial uses while protecting critical government facilities. Finally, unlicensed spectrum. For many, it is the internet in the form of Wi-Fi. It remains the engine behind many of today's most popular consumer technologies, and it is the rock that supports America's freedom to connect. The power and the ubiquity of unlicensed technologies generate substantial benefits to consumers and contributes well over $1 trillion annually to the U.S. economy. As new innovations in Wi-Fi usher in better security, lower latency, and multi-gigabit speeds, it's critical we support America's continued leadership and expansion in this space. Finally, our wireless leadership will not be served by an approach that puts all our eggs in one basket. We support this committee's work in extending FCC's auction authority, but the benefits of shared and unlicensed spectrum clearly demonstrate that exclusive licensing can't be the sole focus of spectrum policy. The most effective way to defend and maintain America's wireless leadership will continue to be through a balanced spectrum policy that addresses commercial opportunities on a band-by-band basis and promotes ongoing competition and innovation. Thank you very much. Look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much. And Dr. Ghosh, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Rogers, Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Matsui, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Monisha Ghosh, and I believe that I can offer a balanced perspective on the matters before this committee, given my years of experience working in the wireless industry, government, and academia. I'm currently a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Notre Dame. I took 2 recent leaves of absence to serve in government, first at the National Science Foundation and then as the CTO of the FCC. I continue to be actively engaged with both industry and government. I co-chaired the FCC's Technological Advisory Council's Working Group on Advanced Spectrum Sharing in 2022. I'm an active member of Industry's NextG Alliance, which is developing standards for 6G, and the National Spectrum Consortium's PATH-SS Task Group, where industry, academia, DoD, and NTIA are exploring efficient sharing solutions in 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz. Finally, I'm the Policy Outreach Director for Spectrum X, NSF's Center for Spectrum Innovation, led by Notre Dame. A memorandum of agreement among the NSF, FCC, and the NTIA ensures that the research undertaken in Spectrum X can directly impact policy. My testimony today will address developing a sustainable spectrum strategy, bridging the digital divide, and creating an entrepreneurial wireless ecosystem. A sustainable spectrum strategy is one that balances the needs of commercial wireless, federal applications, and scientific users while exploring all possible spectrum allocation options, exclusive licensing, shared usage, and unlicensed. It is increasingly difficult to relocate incumbent users, and hence sharing mechanisms must be investigated for both unlicensed, as in 6 gigahertz, and licensed, as in CBRS. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, and sound spectrum policy should be based on fundamental technical analyses, measurements, and testing, which includes all relevant stakeholders. National institutes like Spectrum X NIST, and ITS can perform this unbiased technical analysis that is required to determine the appropriate sharing parameters and minimize the probability of interference and maximize spectrum utilization. We have current sharing schemes in the TV white spaces, 6 gigahertz and CBRS, which are based on database-mediated sharing, which may not be suitable for all situations since it's inherently less dynamic. We must consider newer technical approaches to sharing, such as exploiting the spatial dimension offered by smart antenna arrays. Furthermore, we need 6G and beyond standards to be sharing native, that is designed from the very beginning to operate in shared frequency bands with incumbents instead of solely in licensed or unlicensed bands. Here, the US, with its rich history of spectrum sharing innovations in TV white spaces, 6 gigahertz, and CBRS, all led by the US, is well positioned to be the worldwide leader in standards development. Bridging the digital divide will require attention to both availability and affordability of broadband. Wireless backhaul, satellite connectivity, and private networks should all be considered as potential solutions in both rural and urban communities. Each may require additional spectrum to fuel their growth trajectories, and the right mix will be important. The availability of cost-effective spectrum will allow smaller providers and communities to deploy and manage their own wide-area networks, thus bridging the digital divide. The Wireless Institute at the University of Notre Dame advised the city of South Bend to deploy a CBRS network that provides an alternative connectivity option to 1,000 families who otherwise would not have access to similar levels of connectivity at an affordable rate. Newer devices required to access the latest networks are often more expensive. Hence, efforts such as the Affordable Connectivity Program need to continue as well, so that all segments derive equal benefits from the latest technologies. Finally, I'd like to talk about creating an entrepreneurial wireless ecosystem that can leverage America's greatest strength, its startup culture, that unfortunately is not currently as vibrant in the wireless space. Here, Congress must ensure that there are synergies that can leverage the CHIPS and Science Act to encourage innovations in wireless chips. New applications areas for wireless require new chips that do not necessarily have the volumes required by mobile handsets, but are an important and growing component of the wireless ecosystem. Disruptive applications in wireless are often harder to bring to the marketplace due to the lack of access to chips. In conclusion, a spectrum strategy that considers all options, enables sharing with incumbents, and creates spectrum opportunities for emerging use cases will provide the best climate for innovation to flourish in the wireless ecosystem. Thank you for the opportunity to share my views, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you. And Mr. Johnson, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member Matsui, members. Really appreciate you having us here today to discuss American leadership in wireless, which I believe is a strategic imperative for the future of market democracy. And I also have special gratitude for your bipartisan approach. I think the most important and enduring solutions come from bipartisan action, and I'm glad that 2 of our kids, Joe and Crosby, who are here today, get to see the way the government is supposed to work. I'll explain the Senate to them later. My own introduction to wireless communications was in 1998 when I was a 23-year-old Army lieutenant in Germany and got a Nokia cell phone. Back then, 2G felt like science fiction in real life. Those were really heady days for Germany and Europe and market democracy. The Cold War was won, the Berlin Wall was down, Germany was reunified. Europe was more stable and peaceful than any previous era of its history. NATO was bringing in new allies and keeping peace in the Balkans instead of preparing for war with the Soviets. In the year 2000, Vladimir Putin was elected, important verb there, elected to lead Russia, and the US and our allies put China on a path to join the WTO. Serbian people overthrew Slobodan Milosevic, who was thought to be Europe's last dictator, and the reunified government of Germany moved back home from Bonn to Berlin. Back then, we thought this all meant that market democracy would win out once and for all over authoritarianism, and the future would bring previously unimaginable freedom, peace, and prosperity. But a lot has changed since then. China is now the most powerful authoritarian state in world history, and with China's okay, Russia launched the first war of conquest in Europe since World War II. Just before that invasion, President Xi and Putin pledged a friendship without limits. The post-Cold War peace is over. So now the security question of this century is whether we and our market democratic allies can set the world's course, or if China and its supplicants will predominate. That question underlies every other policy question that we face. Will the future be freedom and innovation, or surveillance and control? I think the U.S. approach to 5G, the most secure wireless technology ever, will be central to answering that question. The ubiquitous connectivity driven largely by 5G wireless broadband and the data, AI, advanced analytics that will come with 5G will be a crucial domain for both autocracies and market democracies. Mobile connectivity is essential to modern society, and therefore it must be leveraged for dynamism and innovation. But the social control and information operations from exploitation of this technology is essential to China's autocratic ambitions, and China seeks global influence through this power and control of technology supply chains and information. China has a plan that it is executing with the brutal efficiency of a dictatorship. China is allocating spectrum, particularly mid-band full power spectrum crucial to 5G, to create an ecosystem for tech national champions like Huawei that it can use to encircle the world with its so-called digital Silk Road. China sees an advantage in driving 5G deployments into mid-band spectrum that's available commercially in China, such as the lower 3 and 4 gigahertz bands. It's crystal clear that China has a plan for the world's wireless future. What is our plan? We and our allies are the greatest source of technological innovation and economic vitality in human history. That's why we won World War II and the Cold War. It's why we're presently leading the global 5G economy, but we're hamstrung by disputes between agencies that have slowed 5G deployments and undermined the market certainty and investment that flows from a robust spectrum pipeline. And as many have noted, now we don't have authority to auction more spectrum. We formed NATO to protect market democracies after World War II, and now we must apply to today's technology environment the same commitment to principles of market dynamism, innovation, competition, and democracy. The world's future will be determined by whether the U.S. model of market democracy can harness human ingenuity and progress to prevail over restrictive authoritarians. People inherently crave freedom and opportunity. Market diversity and competition is the beating heart of innovation, and we need to leverage those ideals to our competitive advantage. What that means is we need more spectrum for commercial use. We need coherent government processes to approve commercial deployments, and we need global harmonization of spectrum so the U.S. is not an island. This is absolutely critical to our national security. If we get this right, we will ensure economic and technological vibrancy that undergirds our overwhelming military strength and edge in weaponry. And if we do that, we will lead the free world in addressing the existential threat from the autocratic exploitation of technology, thereby securing the United States and our allies as market democracies. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, and that will conclude our witnesses' opening statements. And at this time, we'll proceed with the members' questions, and we'll get 5 minutes. And I just want to ask a quick question to everyone. If you just answer yes or no, because you all have heard that we've all been talking. You've also talked about that our Spectrum Authority expired last night. We didn't. We tried to get it to May the 19th, and we're not there. Can the United States survive on short time extensions of our auction authority? And just yes or no? Can we?
No.
Let me ask this next question. Through the years I've served on this subcommittee, this question has always come up that the United States was always leading in 5G. Is the United States leading in 5G today, or are we behind?
We're leading today. With your help, we can continue to lead.
I think we're definitely leading.
I think we're leading today because of the innovators, and the government is holding us back.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let me, Mr. Gillen, start with something you had said in your testimony, and I think it's important where we are today. In your bullet points, you said we should create a schedule of future spectrum of auctions. And, you know, one of the things, of course, when you look at Huawei and the rip and replace, and we've already had about $1.9 billion that was already given to the FCC by Congress for the rip and replace. But however, we still need about $3.08 billion more dollars to fully fund it. When you see what Congress is doing, is that what you said, that we need to have a schedule of future spectrum auctions?
I think yesterday showed we have a lot of work to do together to get to that place, that we need the FCC to have the tools to succeed. And I think we have bands available that we think could quickly get to auction to fund other government priorities, to help support the Treasury, but I think most importantly, to really make sure that 5G innovations are happening here.
Okay. Something, and again, when I was reading the testimony last night, something I saw that caught my eye, and sometimes it's always by looking at verb tenses. And Dr. Ghosh, you said that the U.S. was the leader, recognizing that the wide bandwidths were available in the millimeter wave bands could be harnessed. You know, are we falling behind? What's happening out there when you say that we were? That's all. When I see those past tense, it always scares me.
No, I think the U.S. is actually still the leader in millimeter wave technology. The fundamental research and initial development of developing 5G millimeter wave happened in the U.S. I still believe that the U.S. has the maximum number of 5G deployments in millimeter wave.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, also, when I was looking at and going over your testimony last night, you mentioned in your opening statement that we need to have more spectrum available for commercial use in the United States, and that China has a plan that is executing with brutal efficiency of a dictatorship. China's allocating that spectrum, particularly in the mid-band, and how crucial it is to 5G. Could you just, again, what's happening from China to the United States, kind of briefly, between the United States and China when you're looking at that issue?
I think China has as Chair McMorris Rogers laid out in her opening, China has a strategy and a plan. The one benefit of an authoritarian regime is that they can do exactly what they want on a moment's notice. That has significant downsides in other areas, but when you're trying to clear spectrum bands for their purpose of taking over, essentially winning the 5G leadership race, it means that they can target the lower 3 and 4 bands and expect the rest of the world to follow China's lead, while the United States is an island and is not deploying 5G in those bands. So it's a methodical and strategic plan that they're executing, and they can because they're a dictatorship. Our system is a little bit more complicated. I think it works a lot better over the long term, but we need to have a plan that leverages our strengths.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Assey, I'm sorry, in my last 30 seconds, you said something again, but also reading your statement, when you're looking at that, you said about when you're looking at the unlicensed out there, and that's the engine and the rock out there, and when you look at from the Internet of Things, the AVs and everything else, are we able to keep going to make sure we maintain that level? And I'm sorry, I only got about 10 seconds left.
No, thank you for the question. I think we've always been the market leader when it comes to unlicensed technology. The action that was taken by the FCC in 6 gigahertz was the first unlicensed band that we had opened up in a decade, and we're poised to extend that leadership, not just here, but also around the globe. I think it is a point where we face a lot of opposition, particularly from China on a country-by-country basis, that sees America's continued leadership on unlicensed technology as a threat. And I think it's an area where we can work to try to counter that influence and continue what has been an incredibly important technology, not just for this country, but for the world.
Well, thank you. And my time has expired, and it's time to recognize the gentlelady from California, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In both Congress and the executive branch, clear delineations of jurisdiction help promote efficiency and productive collaboration. I believe inconsistencies in these jurisdictional lines is in part to blame for breakdowns in spectrum governance. Mr. Gillen, briefly, in your opinion, does mission creep among federal agencies affect the federal government's ability to speak with one voice on spectrum issues?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and I greatly appreciate your leadership on this issue for a number of years now. You've really been the one to call out that we need to speak with one voice. And absolutely, there's been mission creep. We have too many voices trying to get involved in spectrum discussions. We have expert agencies at the FCC and NTIA. We need to rely on them and let them make their decisions. And too often right now, they're being second-guessed. And the sooner we get back to letting those experts do their job, the better we are as a nation in terms of addressing all the things Mr. Johnson said is happening around the globe.
Okay, thank you. I introduced the CHIPS Act with Congressman Michael McCall to reassert America's leadership in the semiconductor industry. Secretary Raimondo released the first notice of funding opportunity last week, and I'm excited about how this funding will boost advances in wireless communications. Professor Ghosh, can you describe how the CHIPS Act can encourage innovation in wireless chips and spectrum governance more broadly?
Thank you for that question. I strongly feel that even though we made great advances in 5G and unlicensed, and the standards have actually helped tremendously, there comes a point where innovations become much harder to get into the marketplace because there is so much of a standardization channel that one has to go through. So with the lot of the new spectrum that is becoming available, you need new wireless chipsets. Sometimes 5G can handle those, sometimes they cannot. But what is happening today, I feel, is that the mobile consumer market is the dominating customer of wireless chips. And if something does not fit into that pipeline, it's much harder. And so you can see that in that there are very few wireless hardware startups. There are many software startups because they don't face this issue. So I would really like to see how the CHIPS Act could create an ecosystem where these alternative wireless chips could be manufactured.
Okay, that's great. We're hoping for that. Professor Ghosh, again, I've been working on draft legislation, which I hope to release soon, that would make important updates to the Spectrum Relocation Fund. This fund helps federal agencies transition off spectrum to make it available for commercial use. I want to see this fund modernized to give agencies more flexibility and ensure they have the tools they need to meet their missions. Professor, do you think additional incentives for federal agencies like upgraded technology could help free spectrum for commercial use?
Absolutely. I think one of the problems we face when we look at spectrum sharing is you're trying to share between legacy systems, which are sometimes decades old, with very new systems that are much more agile, can share better, and we always have to be backward compatible. And so having funds that allow some of these legacy systems to upgrade or either relocate or even share better, even if you wanted to share better with a co-allocee, and if that's a word, in the band, if you have better front ends and better filters, that will allow you to do that better. Okay. So I think we should explore all possibilities for doing this. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Johnson, can you discuss how spectrum harmonization informs geopolitical competition and what the U.S. can do to advance its interests abroad?
Absolutely. I touched on this in the answer to Mr. Chair's question. The great question, ma'am. It has to do with global scale. It's related to what Dr. Ghosh just said about putting chips and other components out that can reach global scale. If you have global harmonization of spectrum bands, then American and allied companies can compete, and often, almost always in a fair competition, the U.S. and allied companies are going to win that competition. If they have the global scale, then they're not just selling to one market, they're selling to the world. And that's going to be crucial for the success of the CHIPS Act. Right. We need to have global harmonization of these bands for that to materialize. Okay,
well, thank you very much, and I'm running out of time. And Mr. Assey, I wanted to ask you about scoring, but I'll ask that later. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back, and what you're hearing is the votes are being called. What we're going to do is I'm going to run over and vote first, and then Our vice chair, our good friend from Georgia, is going to sit in the chair as the vice chairman. I'll run over and vote and come right back, and members are just coming back so we can keep the hearing going. Thank you. And at this time, the chair will recognize the gentlelady from Washington, the chairman of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The House recently passed our Spectrum Auction Authority Extension Bill, the H.R. 1108, and it failed to pass the Senate. So now we have FCC's Spectrum Auction Authority expiring for the first time in 30 years. So starting with Mr. Gillen, do you support this bill, led by myself and Ranking Member Pallone, to reauthorize Spectrum Auction Authority until May 19th?
Yes, it's critical the FCC has this tool back.
Mr. Assey?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Ghosh?
Yes, I think it's important for both exclusive licensing and shared.
Thank you.
Crucial to our national security.
Thank you. Dr. Ghosh, I wanted to just follow up. You know, now we find ourselves needing to work quickly to reauthorize Spectrum Auction Authority, improve interagency coordination on spectrum management actions, and restore trust in the process. The NTIA and FCC are expert agencies when it comes to the management of spectrum decisions. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act authorized the auction of the lower 3 gigahertz band, but provided uncertainty to the auction by requiring the Secretary of Defense to approve the auction moving forward. We need to restore the spectrum management process. NTIA must be at the helm in order to maximize efficient spectrum use. When decisions are made by expert agencies, they also need to be respected by all agencies and industry as final. So from a technical perspective, what can be done to inject confidence back in this process?
I'm involved, as I mentioned in my testimony, in the discussions happening in Path SS. And NTIA, FCC, and DoD are all in the room along with industry and academia. Spectrum decisions take time, unfortunately, and what we are trying to work out in the committee is what is the most appropriate method. Is it shared licensing? Is it exclusive licensing? And the technical analyses are being done as a community. So I think that process is working, and I hope that at the end of the process, the lead agencies, which are NTIA and FCC, when it comes to spectrum matters, are the ones that will take final decisions about how they proceed in that particular band. But as I said, it is not an easy decision to say that we should or should not do one form of licensing versus another. There's a lot of technical input that needs.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, in your testimony, you argue that the central question to security in the 21st century is whether the future will be one of freedom and innovation or surveillance and control. What are the risks to the United States if we fail to reauthorize Spectrum Auction Authority and create a stable, predictable environment for investing in wireless technology?
Madam Chair, I think that if we don't authorize more spectrum, more auctions, and therefore more spectrum, we will not lead in 5G. And if we don't lead in 5G, it's very simple. China and its authoritarian supplicants will predominate in the 21st century. That means an existential threat to market democracy, which means an existential threat to the United States, because the future of technology is going to go in one of two ways. As you mentioned in your opening, freedom and innovation or surveillance and control. And these two things can't exist together. So it is a crucial matter of national security, and it really goes down to weapon systems and military strength as well. We can't win the future without winning 5G and AI and quantum and everything that goes along with that.
Thank you. As a follow-up, you also note in your testimony that we need global harmonization of spectrum bands so that the United States is not on an island. How would failing to reauthorize Spectrum Auction Authority undermine the United States' efforts to lead on spectrum policy internationally?
Well, to give one example, in the lower 3 and lower 4 bands, China is seeking to harmonize the world without the United States. And it's if they do that, they will have a distinct advantage over the United States in 5G. I would never bet against us. As I've mentioned before, we're the most innovative, the biggest source of innovation and advances in world history. But if we're doing it without us playing on the globally harmonized bands, we're doing it with a hand tied behind our back, or worse.
Right. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Very timely. Yield back.
The gentlelady is yielded. The chair now recognizes the ranking member from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Last week, the Energy and Commerce Committee advanced bipartisan legislation that overwhelmingly passed the House to extend the FCC's auction authority, restore the role of the NTIA as the arbitrator of federal spectrum holdings, and use auction proceeds to pay for important public safety and national security programs in Next Generation 911 and the RIP and Replace program. More recently, the House unanimously passed a bill extending auction authority to give House and Senate negotiators more time to continue negotiating a package. In both cases, the Senate failed to act on these important bills. So today, we're in a new world where the authorities expired for the first time in 3 decades, creating doubt and uncertainty about America's governance over spectrum and ability to continue to lead in wireless innovation. So, Mr. Johnson, does this expiration have the potential to give China and other countries a leg up in their global campaign to dominate the world's wireless future? And in your opinion, is the continued presence of Huawei equipment in U.S. networks a national security threat? And I know you've already talked about this, but I'd like to have more detail.
I think the short answer is absolutely yes on both counts, and happy to elaborate on either of those. But again, I think with the question of Huawei, we need to have a future of trusted suppliers that are based in the United States and our allies, and therefore based in market democracies and operate under the rule of law. And the Spectrum Authority and leading the future of 5G is crucial to that, because China has a plan to go the other way and encircle the world with this digital Silk Road led by Huawei and other national champions like ZTE and others.
Thank you. And obviously, we're going to continue to work on a bipartisan basis here in the House and try to get the Senate to do something. Mr. Gillen and Mr. Assey, can you both talk about how your members and in turn the American public will benefit from the stability of a long-term pipeline of spectrum and FCC auction authority? We'll start, I guess, with Mr. Gillen.
Thank you, Congressman. Absolutely. The key for so much of the development we want with 5G jobs, with innovations around manufacturing and healthcare, come back to, do we have the spectrum to actually support these functionalities? And so we are really excited about what 5G can be, and the key to making that go is additional spectrum auctions and the certainty that this committee can uniquely provide.
Mr. Assey?
I think it goes to what I said in my testimony. The demand for data just continues to grow and grow. And we need all available technologies to be able to provide the type of seamless connectivity from providers all the way down, not just to the household, but to the device in the consumer's hand. We have a great opportunity to do that, but we need to be able to work on a balanced strategy that will unlock new spectrum for commercial use.
All right. Well, let me get to my last question. As you know, I mentioned in my opening statement that most Americans rely on their wireless devices daily without even thinking about it. And as we consider how to ensure there's a spectrum available for all these uses, we have to ensure that certain communities are not left out of the incredible opportunities that wireless innovation will bring. In the short time that's been in place, the Affordable Connectivity Program has helped nearly 17 million Americans afford broadband and ensured that the networks fueled by all this spectrum are put to good use in communities across the country. So on that note, again, Mr. Gill and Mr. Assey, do you agree that this program has been successful in connecting people all over the country who might not otherwise be able to afford internet service? You've got about 30 seconds each.
It's been incredibly helpful, and as you alluded to in your opening, we're very proud that wireless is the on-ramp to the internet for millions of low-income Americans. We're proud that 55% of Americans are electing mobile solutions when taking advantage of this program. You see great work, countries, Navajo Nation, Cellular One, connecting 40,000 that weren't connected before, expanding that access. So we're greatly appreciative of how that program is bringing more people online.
I appreciate your mentioning Indian country, too, because it's so important to them. Mr. Assey?
Yes, we obviously are actively engaged in the ACP program and believe very strongly in broadband adoption. It's important not only to the consumers and the families that are on the program, but it's also important related to the work that this committee and this Congress has done in providing funding to build new infrastructure and to reach the unconnected, because those people are going to need to be online as well, and it's important that we follow through with that program.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's
Good to
tired.
see you in the chair.
The gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bill Rakis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. And I do hope that the Senate is watching this particular hearing. Before today, we've never seen a spectrum auction authorization lapse before. It's been said several times. And there are a lot of questions about the extent of the disruption. It goes without saying that the FCC would not have authority to start new proceedings for new auctions. But my question for Mr. Gillen is, in your opinion, sir, would the FCC still have authority to process auctions that have already taken place to allow auction winners to receive the rights to the spectrum bands they have already paid for?
Thank you for the question. And as you noted, this is an unprecedented day. We haven't been this place in 30 years. So I think, unfortunately, the answer is we don't know. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in industry. There's a lot of uncertainty at the FCC as to what the FCC can and can't do right now. This has been a critical tool in how they operate. It provides 25% of the funding for the agency. So the sooner we get the certainty back and we start moving forward, we can get those questions asked. The spectrum you alluded to is spectrum that's been purchased and could be benefiting Americans today if it was in the hands of licensee. And so those are some of the challenges that we have today that we've never had before.
Thank you. As a follow-up, Mr. Gillen, if it's ultimately determined the FCC does not have authority to process completed auctions, how does this impact private bidding in future auctions and the government's ability to earn top dollar when licensing future bands when that authority is reinstated?
It's a great question. Uncertainty does not drive capital. So the more certainty we have that the FCC is going to have the authority to do the auctions, to license the spectrum, and also a part of what this committee is really key is the certainty when those auctions are coming, what is coming next, and to actually have a schedule and a plan. And so that is not just giving the FCC the tool, it's also setting a schedule going forward is critical if we want to keep up with what's going around the world, if we want to meet the demand of American consumers. We just need that certainty and actually need the plan of how we're going to get this spectrum out in a way over the next few years that is meaningful. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Assey, spectrum auctions are one of the few things the federal government does that actually raises money. I'm particularly interested in ensuring that Americans get the most from industry for these finite resources. The benefits are clear when exclusively licensed spectrum is auctioned off for revenues. But can you articulate how the American taxpayer benefits from shared licensed and unlicensed spectrum usages?
Thank you for the question. You know, I think if you go back to 1993, that's when auction authority really started. And you have to look at it as one arrow in the quiver, a tool that the government can use. And before that time, we had a very strange process for assigning rights in spectrum, which was we had a lottery or we had comparative hearing. So this was a mechanism for distributing the rights. But there's no question that when you hold an auction, revenues are created when you distribute those rights. But that is a byproduct, not an end in and of itself. And I think one of the things that you have to look at is not just kind of the short-term upfront revenue that comes in, but all the revenue that is created by the innovation that is unlocked when spectrum is made available for commercial use. You know, we talked about the unlicensed economy contributing over $1 trillion annually to the U.S. economy. That's of great economic benefit. It's of great economic benefit to let 1,000 flowers bloom, to have more competitors in a marketplace, and to have a robust ecosystem that can support the development of equipment. That's what will make us successful for the long term.
I appreciate it very much, and I want to thank all of you for your testimony. Very informative. I'll yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York for 5 minutes.
And good morning, and let me start by first thanking our panel of witnesses for joining us today, as well as Chairman Latta and Ranking Member Matsui for convening this hearing on America's wireless leadership at such an important time with the recent lapse in the FCC's Spectrum Auction Authority. I'm proud of this committee's previous work to advance thoughtful legislation around spectrum auctions and urge our Senate colleagues to do your job. I mean, what's the problem? Follow the House's lead and pass legislation extending this critical authority. The wireless industry plays a vital role in our increasingly digital society. Innovation in a disparate array of industries, including healthcare, agriculture, autonomous vehicles, gaming, manufacturing, and more, is powered by connectivity. As policymakers, it is our responsibility to ensure that long-time industry stakeholders and new market entrants alike have access to the resources and information necessary to maintain competitiveness globally and provide Americans with high-quality service. My first question is intended for Mr. Gillen, but any of our witnesses are welcome to respond as well. Mr. Gillen, given the wireless usage trends in the U.S., can you speak to the consequences from an industry perspective of continued inaction on Spectrum Auction Authority?
Thank you, Congresswoman. You're exactly right. This uncertainty is going to have a direct impact on American consumers. We expect 5 times more growth between now and 2027. Our ability to meet that growth will be called into question if we don't get more spectrum. I think the bigger risk, as Mr. Johnson's alluded to, is you risk ceding our leadership and things going forward to China and other countries that are providing spectrum resources more quickly. And so it's really critical, both from our global competitiveness, but also just creating more jobs with 5G economy, that we need to get going now.
Would anyone else like to respond to that? Dr. Ghosh?
Yes, I would like to just support that statement and also point out that when we talk about auction authority, it's not just for exclusive licensing. So even if we go down the route of shared spectrum, CBRS was auctioned and licensed. So we need the license authority so that the FCC can investigate all these different ways of spectrum sharing, whether it's exclusive or not.
I would agree with that, and I would just underscore that, auction authority is a very useful tool in the toolbox, but the real end here is, can we unlock more commercial spectrum? Can we develop new strategies that will allow us to share spectrum, to make more intensive use of spectrum, to become more efficient? Because that is really the only way that we're going to meet the demand for commercial services, but also be respectful and responsive to the needs of government users.
Mr. Johnson, would you just comment on the global dynamic?
It is commercial spectrum, and more commercial spectrum is indispensable to our economic and technological vitality in the core center of the future of the economy and security. If we don't have it, we can't compete, and therefore we can't win the future. I mean, we won World War II because we were the arsenal of democracy. We won the Cold War because market democracy works a lot better than the system that the Soviets had in place. You can just look at West Germany and East Germany, and it's the economy and technology that makes a difference. If we don't have spectrum, we are fundamentally hamstrung.
Thank you. As co-chair of the Smart Cities Caucus, I want to ensure that we are leveraging next generation technologies to improve lives and enable better living conditions for all. Even major cities like New York face unique challenges that are best addressed through technological advances like the Internet of Things and access to high-speed, affordable Wi-Fi. Mr. Assey, can you discuss the uses of unlicensed spectrum and other advances in technology that have the potential to power smart cities? And other panelists are welcome to chime in as well.
Yes, Congresswoman, there's no question that when we talk about seamless connectivity, we're talking about taking that fiber-rich network that has been built over the past decades and really just going beyond those boundaries and creating connectivity that is ubiquitously available to all. That can be via unlicensed spectrum, that can be via CBRS spectrum, that can be via 5G spectrum. but I think it's an immensely powerful position that we're going to be in to promote partnerships between providers and cities to deal with things like traffic management, to deal with things like sensor networks that will allow it to manage lights, to deal with venues and public information. This is a great positive step forward. It's a wonderful set of services that is being developed. We're seeing evidence in the CBRS space. Cox Communications is partnering in Las Vegas to do just this, and we expect more of it in the future.
And I thank you for your response, and I have to yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The agenda yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan's 5th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. This Congress, I've had the honor to serve as a co-chair of both the 5G caucus and the Rural Broadband Caucus. The road to connection for all Americans will be paved by a number of technologies, wireless, Wi-Fi, fiber, satellites, but our country's full connectivity potential cannot be realized without establishing a coordinated and robust spectrum pipeline, and to that we all agree. To that end, Mr. Gillen, Mr. Assey, what are the most underutilized frequencies by commercial or federal users? And secondly, where should Congress focus its efforts on a spectrum pipeline bill?
Thank you, Congressman. Thanks for your leadership on the caucus as well. We think the focus needs to be on mid-band spectrum. It's what's being used around the world. We think there's imbalance today right now in terms of the government has 12 times more control than available for 5G in the mid-band. In terms of specific bands, the lower 3, 4, and 7 gigahertz, we think there are opportunities for win-win opportunities for agencies. Dr. Ghosh alluded to, a lot of the agencies are using not the most efficient systems in the world. Through auctions, we can help upgrade those systems and create better outcomes. So there's a lot of spectrum in those bands, and we think there's opportunities for both commercial and government success.
I'd agree that the 3 gigahertz band is an opportunity for us to unlock new spectrum. I think it is going to require sharing techniques that are going to allow us to be able to use for commercial use while respecting the needs of government users. I also think the 7 gigahertz band is an area where we could see that work that we did in 6 gigahertz, opening it up for unlicensed, extended, and pave the way for the next generation of unlicensed Wi-Fi technology, Wi-Fi 7.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, as I said earlier, I'm co-chair of the 5G and Beyond Caucus. My fellow co-chairs recently reintroduced H.R. 1377, the Promoting U.S. Wireless Leadership Act, which would advance U.S. wireless competitiveness by directing the NTIA to promote U.S. participation and leadership in communication standard-setting bodies. Participation in these international groups, at least I believe, is critical for our country to remain the wireless leader. If China is successful in setting spectrum policy and moving the rest of the world in a different direction than the United States, does that mean Chinese network gear like Huawei and ZTE will be the standard going forward? And secondly, what does that mean for the security of us and our allies?
Thank you, Mr. Wahlberg. That's a great question. To take both parts of the question, on the standards processes, U.S. and allied innovators have long set the standard, literally set the standards in 3GPP and in other international standards bodies. China is trying to take kind of a government-centric approach to shape those standards processes. I think there's been a lot of talk about lots of Chinese entities like Huawei and CTE sort of flooding the zone in these standards processes. It's a concern, but the innovation and the technical aspects of standards setting takes place with the best ideas and the best innovations. So long as we are at we and our allies are at and those companies that are based in market democracies are at the table, I feel confident that they will literally set the standards in the future. We just need to make sure that they are there, and there are a whole host of policy ideas that can help make that happen. On the second part of your question about Huawei and ZTE and other tech national champions based in China, The reason that they have a strategic objective to deploy the digital Silk Road, as they put it, is because if the world is wired with gear and companies that are based in the People's Republic of China, the People's Republic of China can control those networks. It's really that simple. It's not about backdoors or, is there some sort of, espionage capability? Yes, there is, I think, but the real issue is control. You can think about it like Russia's gas pipelines. If they control the flow of gas to Europe, then they've got a strategic power over Europe. Same thing. That's why we don't want to have China and Huawei wiring the entire world.
Well, I appreciate that. More could be asked, but right now I guess we appeal for a functioning Senate who can understand the challenges and at least help us start to get back on track. So thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. 5G is now beaming across much of the nation. I know how much work it took for a lot of you in this room, as well as our partners at the FCC and the Congress, and the infrastructure laws extending high-speed internet to rural areas, including in South Osceola County, where I represent. These spectrum auctions have fueled economic growth, advances in technology and communications, and key revenue for critical programs. The spectrum is critical for faster downloads for Central Floridians and for all Americans, for better connectivity for devices, advances in artificial intelligence, virtual reality, multiplayer gaming, commercial uses in commercial space, tourism, simulation and training, so many areas that we back home care deeply about. And we did our part in the House by extending the Spectrum Auction Authority last week. Yet the Senate let it lapse due to concerns by the U.S. Department of Defense. We obviously all want a strong defense of the homeland, but I would note that until recently, these auctions have been a wholly civilian process by the FCC. So I wanted to start by getting a sense from all of you. First, we'll start with Mr. Gillen. How well has the civilian process worked, and do you know of any security threats that arose from the process? Like, has DoD reached out to you about that? Because a lot of this is just coming to a head now.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And the FCC process works really well as long as there's access to spectrum to sell. And the challenge we have now is 12 times more of this critical asset is being controlled by the government than is available to commercial use. So the only source really of spectrum right now is the government users. And I think we've replicated in this committee's leadership with AWS-3 auction and the 3.45 auction that we create win-win opportunities, that we actually strengthen the mission, that a lot of the equipment that our military and agencies are using needs to be upgraded, can be used spectrum more efficiently, and auction proceeds can go do that. So we tend to think when engineers start talking about these on a system-by-system basis, there are wins-wins. We can increase our warfighting capabilities and deliver advanced services to your constituents.
Thanks. And Mr. Assey, how do you feel the civilian process has worked, and do you know of any security threats that arose from the civilian process to date? Has DoD reached out to the association or your clients about it, or what is your belief on those things?
I mean, I think the process is I won't say necessarily messy, but it is probably reflective of the fact that we have a lot of users and a lot of complicated, important national security interests to try to work through. Dr. Ghosh referred to the Path SS process that began over a year ago. My industry, Mr. Gillen's industry, and others are participating with DoD and NCTA and others in trying to work through that process, but it is extremely difficult, and we have some real challenges. There was a report today that it might take as long as 20 years and $120 billion to vacate that ban. So, we're going to have to really try to rely on the experts like Dr. Ghosh who have the technical expertise to try to deal with this issue and really do our best to figure out how we can make spectrum available.
And we're going to pivot to Dr. Ghosh now. Can we do both?
Yes, I believe we can. I think if vacating becomes impossible, we have to look at better ways of sharing. And just to address your question about, has DOD reached out, have they complained? Let's take the example of CBRS. There have been 250,000 CBSDs deployed. As far as we know, there's never been any complaint of interference from the DOD. So clearly, sharing can work. Sharing can work to protect the incumbent, which is the DOD. It can also work in places like South Bend, where now you have 7 terabytes of data being transferred over CBRS to low-income families, which you wouldn't have been able to do if that spectrum had been locked away. So we have to investigate how we can best use spectrum. I would encourage people not to take sides that it has to be auctioned and licensed. There are many, many innovative ways that we can think about sharing spectrum.
Mr. Chair, I'd urge that we hold tight to our jurisdiction, not let this get away from us. This needs to remain a civilian process, and I'd encourage us to have DOD be more plain about some of their concerns so that we can resolve this.
Thank you very much. And the gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the vice chair of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Georgia, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for scheduling this meeting. The timing is obviously impeccable and incredibly timely hearing. And as all of you have pointed out, Americans are very dependent on reliable connectivity, and we all understand that. And thank you for being here, and thank you for emphasizing that. And it's our job on this committee, in particular, to ensure that the agencies that are tasked with this responsibility of managing the spectrum have the resources that they need to be successful. And I'm just looking forward to continuing on that task for this committee. Dr. Ghosh, I'll start with you. Obviously, as an engineer and a researcher, not unexpectedly, you have highlighted the importance of making the spectrum decisions informed by unbiased and technical analysis. In fact, I will share with you, and I am running the risk of being a little self-serving here, but just 2 days ago, this subcommittee voted to advance my legislation, to codify the Institute for Telecommunication Sciences, which you note in your testimony plays a crucial role in making spectrum available for commercial use. And I want to ask you, what role do you think that this laboratory will play in America's ability to stay ahead of international competitors like China on spectrum policy?
I think ITS, along with other institutes like NEST and SpectrumX, have a huge role to play here. They have the expertise to actually do testing. Oftentimes, these sharing mechanisms and these systems are designed with very accurate simulations and analyses, but the real world, especially when you talk about RF signal propagation, does not follow those analyses very carefully. So we do have to have processes in place where we have platforms that can actually deploy and test some of these really complicated systems that we're developing. Great. So I would definitely encourage, that ITS be central to these discussions, as well as other research labs across the country in the universities and other places.
Good. Well, thank you. And thank all of you for making the point of how important this is for our competition with China, because I think one of the greatest threats to our country is just that, is China and the threat that exists there. And all of you have made that quite clear during this hearing today, and I appreciate that. I'm a healthcare professional, a pharmacist, the oldest pharmacist in Congress, by the way. And I've always, I've made it one of my top priorities to make sure that we're competitive in the pharmacy world and the pharmaceuticals with China. And we need to be competitive here as well. There's no question about that in the wireless space, but the consequences are great. Mr. Gillen, I'll ask you, for decades, Congress has designated NCTA to manage federal agency use of spectrum. When it comes to extending auction authority and making more spectrum available for commercial use, why is it important to have one agency in charge of speaking for the executive branch?
It's critical that we can't have agencies fighting amongst each other. These are technical things, as Dr. Ghosh has alluded to, and we need to let the experts make those hard calls and to decide the interference rights and then commercialize the spectrum. And once that auction's sold, we need those that bought the spectrum to be able to use it to start delivering services as quickly as possible.
So what would it look like if we had, each agency managed their own spectrum use?
I think we could all go home. We'd be in a
Yeah,
really bad place.
exactly. No question about it, and thank you for making that point. Mr. Assey, I'll ask you this. Two recent auctions of federal spectrum for commercial use are in the CBRS band and the 3.45 to 3.55 gigahertz band. These two spectrum bands both involve spectrum sharing, but each band approaches the issue slightly differently. Could you please discuss the opportunities and challenges that are presented by each of these type of approaches?
The CBRS auction I can talk about.
Okay.
Sure. I think the benefit of the CBRS auction was that we were able to get all manner of people to participate in that auction. We had not just traditional players, we had cable companies, we had schools, we had John Deere and manufacturers, we have the Port of Long Beach. So we're able to get many more people into the system to be able to bid on spectrum, to be able to use the spectrum and compete in providing services. And we're now starting to reap the benefits of that. Dr. Ghosh talked about the base stations that have been rolled out and the very many different innovative ways in which this spectrum is being put to use, including by wireless carriers. So I think that is an example of how we can have an auction, but also recognize the needs of government users and be able to share spectrum efficiently, but unlock it for commercial use. If we didn't have that type of an arrangement, we might be at the same stalemate and we'd miss the opportunity to get more spectrum into
Well, I appreciate that. I'm about out of time. Mr. Gillen, you want to add something?
Just real quick, and I do think when we look at sharing solutions, we also have to look at the opportunities lost, and that sharing brings low power, particularly the complex sharing we're talking about. If you want to build out to rural America, it's 1/7 the power. That's a lot more time to get to more communities. It's also preemptible. So if you want to build a secure, reliable service to know that the government can come in and say, you can't use that anymore, it makes it harder to do things we're trying to do vis-a-vis China and driving these forward.
Good, good. And I'm out of time, but I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the fact that Mr. Johnson is from the state of Georgia, and this is extremely important to our state. So thank you for being here, and thank you for participating.
Well,
thank you,
very
Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair will recognize his friend, the gentlelady from California's 16th district, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have really been studious about getting the number of my district correct, so proud of you, and thank you. I'm the veteran of hundreds of congressional hearings. I want to compliment all the witnesses today because I think you've made this a highly instructive one, so thank you. Mr. Johnson, as you've made several references to Huawei, and I have been on Huawei for at least a decade, maybe a decade and a half, and I think that that the pressure that was brought to bear, first of all, placing a spotlight on them, where not even a handful were appreciating what Huawei was doing, but I think the tackle and blocking and the cooperation of the FCC and what they put into place on a bipartisan basis, I'm quite pleased about. So to Mr. Assey, I want to go back to this, the CBRS and what that represents. In your written testimony, you discussed the, the deployment of shared license spectrum to enable, obviously, commercial use in federal spectrum bands. You also discussed the FCC's commercial broadband radio service. Oops, I don't have time to shut that off. Can you build on what you've already shared with us, why you believe it's so effective and what the FCC should be doing to evaluate when considering expanding it? And then I want to go to Mr. Gillen, because in your written testimony, you showed skepticism of shared spectrum, particularly CBRS, and why do you think Congress and the FCC should be skeptical of it? So away we go.
I think it is an important model, and as I said, what we're going to need in order to succeed, in order to compete with China, is a balanced approach that really allows us to use every tool in the toolbox to make commercial spectrum available. When we have situations that will not allow for clearing, or that will not allow for us to do that in a timely way, we're basically leaving on the table the ability to get spectrum out there and used by thousands of innovators who could use it to build systems in ports, to build networks in schools. So there's a real benefit to bringing spectrum online as quickly as we can. We obviously need the technologists to basically evaluate these bands. They're getting more crowded. There are lots of competing uses out there. But I think it is a wonderful testament to the ability of our country to innovate in figuring out ways where we can meet the needs of government users, those critical government use needs, but also unlock spectrum that can be put to use quickly and by lots of new competitors to the market.
But is this a kind of a tug of war between different businesses?
Well, I just to follow up, I mean, it's a...
And I want to get to Mr. Gillen.
Sure. I mean, I think what we're going to have to do is go on a band-by-band basis and determine which approach is going to best meet consumer needs.
Mr. Gillen?
Thank you for the question. And I think everything Mr. Assey said is right. This is a valuable experiment, but it's still very much an experiment. We're the first in the world to do it. Roughly, there are lots of good use cases out there, but it's also less than 5% of that spectrum is getting used today. We think we have that sandbox for innovation right now. The places that we need more attention right now is full power spectrum that's licensed. That's where we're really falling behind now.
I see.
So I think in our minds, we have the experiment. Let's focus on things that are full power. Let's focus on things that we know work as we let that experiment continue to develop.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back, and the gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to say thank you, too, to an unusually talented panel that we have gathered today in front of us. So it's very incumbent on us in Congress to pave a path forward for American commercial enterprise to compete with China's rapid technological development. As most of us know, China's digital Silk Road and technologies like Huawei are quickly acquiring the building blocks for 5G and digital dominance. There's a lot of talk all through Congress on the Select China Committee where I sit and elsewhere, basically everywhere, about the dangers of TikTok, which is important. However, if China wins 5G and develops the software that rides on top of the next generation networks, I worry that the Chinese Communist Party will leverage that innovation against the entire free world, all sectors, energy, healthcare, transportation, AI, everything. So I think this is the real risk if we don't make more spectrum available for commercial use. Every person in this room should be concerned about CCP dominance of 5G technology and what that means for national security and the future generations to come in America. My esteemed colleagues on this committee enjoy bipartisan pro-American approach to technological innovation, which is fundamental in finding a solution to this interagency debate and political disputes. These things are standing in the way, honestly, in the way of America's global competitiveness. I look forward to finding a real solution that clears both chambers of Congress at this urgent time. With that said, Mr. Johnson, you mentioned in your testimony, positive developments in global competitiveness for spectrum use include 1, more spectrum, and 2, coherent government processes for proven commercial use. Let me say I agree that leveraging American free markets is a key development to a path forward. And we hear, however, about China making large amounts of spectrum available through raw government command and control. should we be following them down the path to making the same frequencies available, or can we rely on the market forces to determine what spectrum best serves American interests?
Thank you, Congressman. It's a very important question, and also want to commend you for focusing in on the CCP. When I say China, I'm talking about the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people.
We're sensitive about that on the China Select Committee.
It's absolutely crucial. The Chinese civilization is one of the great civilizations in history. Chinese Americans are going to be a crucial and very important part of our country's future. But this is about the system of government run by the Chinese Communist Party, as you note. And the short answer to your question about should we do it their way, absolutely not. What we should do is have a coherent process that when a decision is made, as fellow witnesses have said, that the decision sticks, and that the U.S. government process, which is collaborative, which is multi-agency, when it arrives at a decision, that the decision is final, and we get to deploy in C-band, for instance, and not have a delay. And as for the global harmonization, we should not be following China's lead. We should be leading in the harmonization. That happens in a variety of places. We've got some incredible public servants who are going to be doing that. Ana Gomez at the State Department. America needs to be leading. But in order to lead, we have to have spectrum available in order to lead the harmonization.
Yeah, thank you for making that clear. I want to make sure that we were on the same page here. Mr. Gillen, the mid-band spectrum deficit in the U.S. that is one's facing, that you outlined in your testimony, really is concerning. We're told now by 2027, China's going to have 4 times as much 5G spectrum as we'll have. Can you explain how China is using spectrum policy to get ahead and what the risk is to the United States economically and to national security? In 30 seconds.
Absolutely. It's no problem. It's twofold. One is that they want the innovations that we've led in 4G, they want those innovations to happen there. They understand that spectrum superiority comes with technical superiority. So from a straight selfish perspective, they want robotics and everything rides on these networks to happen there first. I think as Mr. Johnson said, this is also, in terms of mid-band access, there are global bands being built around the world. We are absent from a lot of those conversations today. We need this committee to jumpstart us and get us in those discussions, because right now we're ceding those conversations to China. We're ceding those conversations to the rest of the world.
Thank you very much. It was very succinct. I think our technology will be untrustworthy if we let China lead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back his time, and at this time, the gentleman from Texas's 33rd District is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Gillen, in your testimony, you talked a little bit about the Affordable Connectivity Program. I was hoping that you could expand on that a little bit and talk about the importance of that program and being able to connect some of these families. I think that 55% of Americans under the Affordable Connectivity Program now have access to reliable, high-speed internet. How important and transformational that is for our country.
It's so critical. Everything we're talking today is about the connectivity that will empower, improve education outcomes, improve healthcare outcomes. That all depends upon people actually being connected. And so the ACP has been critical to get millions of Americans to stay on broadband and also millions to get on broadband. We're very proud that 55% of Americans are picking wireless solutions. We've always been the on-ramp for the internet for millions of Americans, and we think it's something that's very important. And so we very much appreciate the program's focus on making sure that all Americans benefit from the conversation we're having today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was also hoping that if you could elaborate on a different topic, but the tangible benefits that Americans are receiving because the FCC has had the authority to conduct auctions and awarding spectrum.
The most recent one that brings to mind is 5G Home, because having more spectrum that has more capabilities allowed us to now enter the home broadband market. And that creates more competition. We have 90% of new home broadband ads were wireless companies this last year. It also is a great tool to help close the digital divide. Too many kids still outside McDonald's doing homework. Still today, despite a lot of good work, fixed wireless is a solution that can help address that really quickly. And so that solution is as good as the spectrum we have. And the more spectrum we have, the more robust that can go. And the more full power spectrum we have, the further into rural America we can deploy that asset.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that the FCC's auction authority expired last night, but hopefully they'll get that fixed over in the Senate soon and extend that. As Congress looks to a longer-term extension, how important is it going to be for us to create a pipeline of spectrum, and how will this help in reducing the current deficit the U.S. is facing and making mid-band spectrum available for commercial use as compared to our competitors around the globe?
It's central. Only this committee can do this. We've seen that each time you've extended auction authority for a long term, 2012 is the last good example. Because of that, the FCC had something to auction. We can't just give the FCC auction authority and then not have anything for them to sell. And it is critical for this committee to identify those particular bands, particularly mid-bands, that can go far, can carry a lot, that is being used around the world. And really, this committee is uniquely situated to not only, as you guys have worked really hard to preserve auction authority, but also make sure that we have a plan going forward to deliver on the promise that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Dr. Ghosh, I wanted to ask you, really appreciate all the work that you're doing to bring together researchers and staff from universities, including minority-serving universities at Spectrum X. And I was hoping that you could tell us that based on your research and experience working in the wireless field, what workforce developments are needed to further aid America's leadership in spectrum policy and wireless technologies?
Thank you for that question. Workforce development is a core activity within our center, and we are taking it down to even the middle school and the high school levels. We need to get kids excited about not just running apps on their phones, but what makes these phones work. And we're doing that through a number of initiatives. We are creating course content within the center that can be used by high school teachers to educate kids in high school. We are creating course content that can be used in community colleges and four-year colleges that can be used to educate people about spectrum. Spectrum is one of those interesting things where there is not one course that you can take that makes you an expert on spectrum. You need to know about physics of propagation, you need to know about electrical engineering, you need to know about software, and bringing all of those competencies together is very, very important. Within Spectrum X, we just kicked off an initiative last week, actually, among 4 of the MSIs, where we're going to have undergraduate students walk around with phones and collect spectrum data, collect signal strengths, look at what their throughputs are, so that they get an understanding of these networks that they depend on, how they actually perform in the real world. We feel that's extremely important activity that centers like Spectrum X can do.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And you also mentioned Affordable Connectivity Program in your testimony, and really appreciate that. I don't think that we can emphasize that enough. So thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the few seconds I have.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gillen and Mr. Johnson, you started off the hearing with your graph, Mr. Gillen, of data usage, and Mr. Johnson, your 2G phone reminded me of my party line when I was young. Tonight you can go home and explain to your children what a party line was. It was not a party, but we literally shared a line with our neighbors. And it made me think of my first laptop computer, and I was proud the day that I upgraded it from 32K to 64K. It was a Radio Shack TRS-80, and certainly highlights the challenge, right, that's ahead of us. I'd like to just briefly highlight something everybody in this room knows about the Spectrum Innovation Act and remind us that the bill made lower 3 gigahertz band available so that we could improve our 5G network and be competitive. It also tied together auction authority with funding for Next Gen 911 and rip and replace, and so that we could take the Chinese telecom equipment out of the U.S. networks and replace them with clean and safe equipment. These programs, I think we should know, were funded with zero taxpayer dollars. That's pretty significant, and without adding to our deficit. Unfortunately, as we've discussed today, the legislation didn't pass the Senate. The auction authority just lapsed, and we have still not fully funded rip and replace. The delay is costing providers in my state and putting the coverage in rural areas in my district at great risk. We all talk about beating China, winning the 5G race and beyond, and securing the communication infrastructures. But when it really came down to it, Congress dropped the ball on this. Let me start with you, Mr. Gillen. One of the issues we're dealing with is making sure that small carriers have resources necessarily to remove and replace Huawei and CTE from their networks. I understand we have over $3 billion shortfall, and if not fully funded by July, these carriers will have to make very difficult decisions about securing their networks. Can you help us understand the urgency for fully funding rip and replace programs and why July is an important date?
Thank you, Congressman. And this has been a priority of the committee for a long time, and you guys brought the focus on this from a national security perspective. We're greatly appreciative.
Could you pull your microphone?
Sorry.
There we go. Thank you.
The challenge we have, as you alluded to, we can do a lot of good things with auction proceeds, and we just need more auctions on the books. And I think whether it's FirstNet that's helped first responders, there's lots of things that you guys decide what ultimately auction revenues do. We need that spectrum, and we are happy to contribute. It's over $233 billion to the Treasury, and there's lots of good congressional priorities that money can get used to.
Could you just briefly restate why the lapse in auction authority hinders U.S. leadership?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. It's when we look at what's happening, not having the ability to have a plan of a set of auctions going forward is really challenging. It's really problematic. We see our rivals moving forward with haste. They have a plan and they're executing on it. And I think the concern Mr. Johnson said about us becoming an island is real, particularly when it comes to mid-band access. And that goes really far. It travels far. It's key to what we want to do to make sure that this benefits all Americans. And so the faster we get mid-band in the hands of innovators, the better things we can do for all consumers.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, good luck explaining a party line to your kids. But for a minute, the irony here is, some of the protection of spectrum is for national security. But can you explain, if we don't let go of that, why it hinders national security?
Thank you, Congressman. I think that might be the most important question here. And Department of Defense, I was born on Air Force Base, Army veteran, loved the Department of Defense. The weapon systems and the services that the Department of Defense and its uniformed services provide are obviously the best in the world, crucial to our national security, crucial to world peace, crucial to every aspect of what we do. That includes some of the capabilities that they that are enabled by their present spectrum holdings. If related to that and underlying that is the economic strength and vitality of the United States and our allies. If we don't have that, and again, I think just look at the difference between the southern part of Korea and the northern part of Korea. The western part of former Germany, the eastern part. It's economic vitality and technology is what provides us the ability to win strategic competitions and to win wars when necessary.
Thank you.
So it's absolutely crucial. I don't presume to have the answer for how exactly technically we go. We have to find a way for that spectrum to be for commercial use.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. I would just like to quickly add my voice to the many compliments to all of you today for being here with us. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lara, and also Ranking Member Matsui for having this very, very important hearing, albeit probably pretty boring to most of the people in America. And hopefully we have at least 7 listeners today live hearing this important discussion. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming forth with your opinions and your expertise as well, and for all the work that you've done. Some of you have been in the private sector for some time, some of you in the universities and also in the public sector as well. So thank you so much for all that you've given to our country and to the progress and process that we're talking about today. We're talking about wireless networks and technologies that play an incredible role in everyone's life in America. Yet at the same time, Americans take it for granted. What we don't do here, what I hope and pray that we don't do in Congress, is take it for granted that everything's going to be just fine. We just saw the expiration happen because the lack of cooperation between 2 bodies, the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, Hopefully, we can get that straightened out soon on behalf of the American people so we can continue to progress. We're not alone in this world. We've talked a lot about China, and China isn't the only player on the planet, but certainly a very dominant player. But yet again, we've heard by testimony that, yes, we've confirmed that the United States still is the dominant player, but we're not alone. And we could fall back, and falling back is not good for security. It's not good for the American people. It's not good for the economy. It's just not good. So with that, what I'd like to do is start off with a question to Dr. Ghosh. In your testimony, you speak about how spectrum policy can help bridge the digital divide. In particular, you said spectrum policy that makes available cost-effective spectrum to small providers and communities to deploy and manage their own wide area networks can be very effective in bridging the digital divide in both urban and rural communities. Could you tell us more about what the FCC has done to ensure that smaller providers and local communities can access this spectrum and provide better service to lower income and underserved communities like mine in the San Fernando Valley?
Thank you for that question. So the most recent example of what the FCC has done is through CBRS. By creating 150 megahertz of spectrum in the mid-bands that can be available either through licensing or even through unlicensed, through GAA licensees, you're allowing communities to deploy their own networks, which is exactly what South Bend has done on their city schools. So we talked a lot about exclusively licensed. We talked a lot about unlicensed. I think we need to explore the space between the two because there are a lot of applications that are not well served by either very well. And shared spectrum, more of that's available. I know you mentioned the higher power. Higher power is great if you want a nationwide footprint, but a lot of these applications, you have a rural community, they just want to get their citizens covered. Low power is fine for those applications. And just another concluding remark on that is that in rural areas specifically, it's not a shortage of spectrum that's creating the digital divide, it's a shortage of infrastructure. And the reason there's a shortage of infrastructure is cost. So we have to balance how much spectrum we have and how do we make sure that infrastructure actually rolls out to the places where it's needed.
And it can be done.
Yes.
Thank you. As you know, Dr. Assey, data tells us that certain communities, such as Hispanic communities, over-index on the use of mobile devices for their primary or sole connection to the internet. Mobile wireless competition in these communities is therefore absolutely critical. If any one provider dominates the marketplace, these communities get the short end of the stick. It's important to me that our spectrum policy in this country keeps this in mind, and we prioritize intense mobile wireless competition. How, in your view, does shared license spectrum support mobile wireless competition that might benefit communities that rely heavily on mobile wireless access to the internet?
Again, I think it goes back to what Dr. Ghosh was saying. It's bringing more providers into the marketplace. In the CBRS auction, we had over 250 people who claimed licenses. That was 10 times what we had seen in prior auctions. But you know, the real acid test, I think, is in the mobile space. We're seeing Comcast and Charter grow. We're seeing them build out that connectivity all around cities and towns, and consumers are benefiting. They're able to provide very attractive rates and savings. And the other thing I think that's really important too is, and it's the reason that we need the balanced approach, is because when you're using this device in your home, you know, Comcast has 80% of the data that's going over here is going over Wi-Fi. It's not going over a licensed network. So we need to make sure that we make commercial spectrum available through all means possible.
And once again, I think public-private partnerships are key in that effort of connectivity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I went over my time.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair now, pardon me, recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Latta. Spectrum plays a vital role in connecting Americans, especially those residing in rural areas like I represent in southwestern and south central Pennsylvania. It ensures that they have the necessary broadband access to work, to farm, to heal, to do their commerce, to learn from home, all which are a vital component of the world that we live in today, which is why the federal government must work together to establish an intergovernmental approach to ensure that all parties involved are on the same page when it comes to spectrum policy. By having that whole-of-government approach, it sends that clear message to stakeholders that in the United States, we want to continue to be the leading innovator. It also shows the rest of the world to look to us in America when it comes to all things spectrum. Mr. Assey, can you talk on how having a balanced spectrum policy benefits the constituents in a rural congressional district like I serve in Pennsylvania?
Absolutely. Obviously, having the availability of unlicensed spectrum is very important. It basically extends the reach of the wired networks that we've built out and will extend the capabilities that your consumers are going to be able to use when they're subscribing to cable service. But it also, these new models, the innovative models like CBRS, are allowing us to take government spectrum that was previously locked away and unlock it and allow a host of different types of manufacturers or towns or schools to be able to build out networks and systems. So I think it's one of these areas where the more we make available to America's innovative spirit, the more we'll be able to produce.
So are you paralleling the ability to have that access to spectrum with the ability of Americans to be the innovators, to be the entrepreneurs that we need?
Absolutely. There's a reason the Uni 3 band was called the Innovation Band, because it unlocked all manner of ideas and technologies that we could only dream of. We hope to replicate that.
I'd like to continue with Mr. Gillen. So recognizing that we're talking about rural areas that are grossly underserved, how do we go home to these areas that are unserved or underserved and talk particularly as a representative from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? How do we assure them that they're going to have the services that they see in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia?
It's a great question, and it's a critical priority. All the things that we're talking about need to be available to all Americans. And I think when we talk about a balanced policy, I share Mr. Assey's goal of we need the government to have enough spectrum, we need unlicensed to have enough spectrum, we need licensed to have enough spectrum. And right now, unfortunately, we're imbalanced. Unlicensed has 7 times more than we do. Government has 12 times more. So that's why we're just focused on the full power license that we're seeing around the world being used. And for us, it is between a full power and a CBRS solution. The difference in power is 7 times over. Our ability to get to more and more communities quickly is all tied to that power level. And so that's why it's so important when we have these conversations. We want to get quicker to more communities. A lot of that conversation gets to, Dr. Ghosh is exactly right, it gets to infrastructure, but how much infrastructure you need goes to how strong that signal can go.
Mr. Johnson, you mentioned in your testimony of the potential danger that the world will face if we allow adversaries like China to lead on commercial wireless communications. How can this body empower domestic industries to ensure that the U.S. continues to be that global leader?
Thank you, Congressman. I think this body has done a lot already through the CHIPS Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. This body has done what it needs to do on Spectrum Authority. My former employer in the Senate needs to make that happen. But it's what I said in my opening. We need more commercial spectrum. We need coherent processes for deployment so that when spectrum is allocated, innovators can deploy and serve. And then we need to harmonize global spectrum bands.
I think you recognize that from a bipartisan basis, from this subcommittee on energy and commerce, we are committed to doing that. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take just a few seconds of personal license, if I may. One of my senior staff, this is his last day as part of our team, Mr. Fred Sotnick, who has been an integral part of my role here on communications and telecom, came to me over 4 years ago, suffered through a grueling interview, and was able to be part of the leadership team of our legislative staff. He is the son of proud parents, both Lou and Desiree. He hails from Wildwood, New Jersey, but he has made Pennsylvania and his commitment to energy and commerce part of his goals, and I'd like everyone to join in with me in thanking Mr. Sotnick and wish him the best of luck. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm new to the committee, and I wasn't here for a lot of y'all's testimony, so I'll probably have some redundancy. That's just a note from the Department of Redundancy Department before I start. But I want to start with you. Mr. Gillen, you said that, Mr. Johnson, you just said with Dr. Joyce here, we need more commercial spectrum. And of course, I'm coming up to speed on all this infrastructure and all the spectrum and the use of it. How do we, if it's a finite source, or how do we get more?
The most basic answer is we need to have a strategy, a thoughtful, discerning, urgent strategy to free up commercial spectrum. A lot of that is held by federal agencies, including Department of Defense. The Department of Defense operates a number of very important capabilities on that spectrum, and we need to find a way to free it up for commercial use, because the core strength of our country is the economic and technological vitality that will come from commercial innovation. That feeds into DoD strength. It feeds into national strength, and even in, to get real specific, it feeds into the strength of weapons systems, both defensive and offensive.
Well, let me follow that up with that same vein of thought. Are there companies that use the spectrum that indeed they're commercial companies, whatever you want to call them, that undergird some of the processes of the Department of Defense?
Oh, absolutely. There's the defense industrial base is
that's a
very
good term.
Important sector. It includes a lot of otherwise commercial companies, and it includes what we traditionally know as defense contractors. And so absolutely it's a very important part of the...
All right, thank you. Mr. Gillen, I'm going to jump over to you. You said that you see full power licenses around the world, I think was what you said earlier. Elaborate on that. But you don't see it here.
Not enough, sir. Right now the focus is on something we call mid-band spectrum. It goes really far and it carries a lot. So when you talk about how we use these devices more and more every year, it's really helpful to get this out to as many Americans as possible. The challenge we have, as Mr. Johnson just alluded to, the government controls roughly 12 times more of this than the commercial industry does. And so how do we do what's happening across the world is that we can use that spectrum we have more efficiently. We're not making any more, you're exactly right, but we can be more efficient with it. And I think we've seen, working through this committee, win-win opportunities where we can help agencies get more efficient systems, get new systems, and give us space to then have commercial operations at the same time.
Are there leaders in more efficient systems today?
I'd say the commercial wireless industry has improved its efficiency 40 times over this last decade. I think it's something that when you pay billions of dollars for something, you get everything you can out of it. So I think there's a huge amount of investment to use this as efficiently and effectively as we can.
At some point, that radio frequency highway becomes super crowded and has rush hour traffic. How far off from that are we?
Without this committee's leadership, we're way too close to that. I think we're in a good place right now, but what you see what's happening around the world, we need to keep getting spectrum out to commercial users to keep up with all the things we want these networks to do.
Mr. Assey, I'm going to come to you. If you were the chair of FCC, what would you do?
That's like lobbyist 101 is not to tell the chair of the FCC what to do. But look, I
the
think
chair's not listening.
Chair's always listening. As I mentioned in my testimony, I think the basic mechanism that we have the FCC that looks at the civilian uses of spectrum. We have the executive branch and NCTA, which deals with the competing uses among all the different government users and agencies. That's the right structure. The problem we face is they're not making any more spectrum. Consumers are demanding data, government users are demanding data. We all need it all the time, everywhere, and we have to figure out new strategies that will allow us to be able to do both. You know,
Let me break in. I've got 9 seconds.
Sure.
Is there a model to follow, whether it's China, the way they deal with spectrum, or any other country? Is there a model to follow?
We have the best model, which relies on more.
Well, that's not encouraging.
Well, we can make it work. I believe we can make it work.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I'm 7 seconds short. Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Excuse me. And the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Hampshire for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today to discuss the future of wireless networks in America. Unfortunately, that future and our nation's ability to remain a global wireless leader came into question last night when the FCC's authority to auction spectrum was allowed to expire. As we've discussed today, this is literally the first time that Congress has failed to protect this critical function of the FCC, and it's simply unacceptable. Spectrum is the backbone of our nation's communication networks that millions of Americans rely upon every single day for work, for telehealth, for school, for education, for entertainment, and most importantly for many of us to connect to our loved ones. Mr. Assey, I appreciate your testimony on the importance of unlicensed spectrum to provide Americans with everyday technologies like Wi-Fi. Can you speak further to the FCC's role in ensuring that sufficient unlicensed spectrum remains available for this important service?
Sure, this is an area where I think the FCC really showed itself to be a trailblazer and put us on a path back in the 80s to really open up this band for innovators and other people who could develop technologies and services that would use this technology. As I mentioned most recently, the FCC's action in opening up the 6 gigahertz band promises to usher in a whole new wave of innovation in this space. We have gone part of the way. We have developed rules that govern low-power indoor devices that provide 3 times the amount of bandwidth, lower latency, more security. Cable companies like Comcast are actively rolling out those technologies to customers, and we have further advances in Wi-Fi technology that are going to be yet another step change and unlock a whole new series of applications when we get to things like virtual reality and augmented reality. So the future is bright, and the benefit of unlicensed spectrum is that we can all participate in it and we can all produce in it. And that's why we have always been a leader in the unlicensed space as a country, and that's why I think we have a great stake in the success of unlicensed, particularly not just at home, but around the world as well.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your expertise. In my district in New Hampshire, homes in rural communities are often spread far from the nearest town or city center. This makes it difficult to provide fast, reliable broadband services to these households, to say nothing of the geography and Mount Washington in the middle. I want to ask Mr. Gillen, if I could, how wireless can help to close the digital divide for hard-to-reach rural areas. And it's not relevant in my district, but I'll add for my colleagues, tribal areas. And now that the FCC's auction authority has lapsed, how will this impact the ability of your wireless companies to provide broadband services to my constituents in New Hampshire or to other rural parts of the country?
Thank you for the question. It's critical. The spectrum is, we are only as good as much spectrum as we have. And as everything Mr. Assey said about the FCC trailblazing and unlicensed access, we'd like that same focus now on license, that we want that same amount of spectrum to be able to innovate and grow with. And I think fixed wireless is now a solution that can get to more and more homes quickly. That it is an opportunity now with 5G home. We're seeing opportunities. Accenture projects that with additional spectrum that this could reach 43% of rural Americans in the next few years. And time is critical because those folks don't have connectivity today. It also gets back to the BEAD program that this committee drove, a technologically neutral approach. The implementation, we're worried, is not focusing on all the solutions available We think that fiber is a place for that program. We also think wireless does too. Every community is going to need to make a difference between quickness, speed, what's available, and the finite amount of money that's available to them. So I think the more solutions we put towards rural America, the better we are, because it's hard. And we all need to be working towards that because we need everyone connected to do all the things we want to do.
Is there any technological benefit of wireless over wired, if you will, for geography, for mountainous areas, for hard-to-reach places?
Every community is different, and every mix is different. I think, yeah, absolutely, that if you have to get fiber all the way to the house, wireless has a benefit if it could be from a tower. There's topography and other challenges. There's other ways of doing it, but it really gets down to these hard-to-reach communities are absolutely hard to reach. But absolutely wireless, if you can do it more quickly you don't have to get all the way to the house, particularly in really expensive areas, that's a solution.
Great. Thank you very much. My time is up, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Latta, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Obviously, we're all disappointed that last night the FCC's authority to auction spectrum expired. You know, it looks like we've got a lot of players in this whole process, and trying to get everybody on the team has been difficult. As we work to make up for this lost time in developing and improving our spectrum technologies, obviously the agencies need to become more flexible, which is a bit of a problem everywhere in this administration, and responsive to the needs of our private partners. Of course, this latest development has moved us in the exact opposite direction. I understand that we are in a global race here, and I am proud that the House last week did pass H.R. 1108, and I hope the Senate will hurry along with that as well. But tell me about the mid-band spectrum, and how can it ensure the U.S. retains global leadership in the wireless industry, Mr. Gillen?
It absolutely can. It's critical. And why mid-band is important is that it is a blend of both capacity, that it can carry all the health care, everything we're trying to do with the spectrum. We can go further. We need to get from Augusta to Evans and beyond. And beyond is about mid-band gets us there. Full power mid-band is really the key to a lot of what the rest of the world is using because of those propagation characteristics. So a lot of the conversation is around mid-band because we don't have a lot of it available commercially in the United States. We see others using it, and we think it's a key part of the solution to meet America's needs going forward.
Well, now that the FCC's auction authority has expired, we must reauthorize it so that the FCC can take action on pending applications to provide service in the 2.5 gigahertz band. Isn't 2.5 gigahertz valuable mid-band spectrum that combines capacity and coverage, meaning it is particularly valuable to my rural areas in my district?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Assey, how does spectrum sharing work, and what are the challenges or opportunity with spectrum sharing technologies to get us out of this current restriction that we're dealing with?
I think spectrum sharing technologies have the ability to create win-win solutions when the alternative is kind of somebody has to lose. I think this is one of the great developments we've seen, and frankly, we're not just seeing here, we're also seeing a lot of work going into this around the world as well. And the reason is because the uses that we have, both on the commercial side and the governmental side, continue to increase. And this is a promising technology of unlocking spectrum quickly so that we can get it to use rather than waiting around for the fifth of never. So the other piece of that is that these technologies, particularly with CBRS, have the ability to bring many more people into the ecosystem to really develop that richness, that rich competitive ecosystem in the wireless industry that not only benefits consumers but will benefit the broader industry as well. And that's a way in which we can support these types of experiments through a balanced policy that focus on everything.
Mr. Johnson, is it possible that, of course, we've got, the private and then the public users of spectrum. Is it possible that the public users could get into sharing as well to free up some of that space?
I think it's not only possible, it's imperative. You do not want a lawyer determining how you divvy all this up, but we have to have spectrum available for commercial use as a national security imperative. There are ways to do that, and we'll let the experts to my right determine how that happens. But the key point is more commercial spectrum, and it's as a crucial national security imperative.
Exactly. We can't lose this race, as I see it. Is that correct? Does everyone agree with that? Okay.
I don't think it's an overstatement to say that if we lose this race, we lose market democracy.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. And Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Idaho for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, panel, for your time and expertise here today. Question for Ms. Ghosh. I look at your resume, and you've got electronic engineering training, experience in the private sector, government, and academia. And that poses a background that I would like to explore in terms of your perspective on something. 5G and its networking capability and access is something that's very exciting to me. Artificial intelligence and its potential processing capacity is very exciting to me. The potential of those two being combined is frightening to me. Can you take about a minute and tell me if my fears are warranted or not?
So artificial intelligence, the way I look at it in terms of 5G and wireless, is really another tool that we can use to manage the performance of the networks much better. So I think the parts of artificial intelligence that we have to be very careful about is when you go into the human aspect of it. Are there biases being created? Is the artificial intelligence way of optimizing a network somehow going to automatically disadvantage people in a lower income neighborhood because they're not paying top dollar for their services? So we definitely have to make sure that we are aware of the pitfalls of using artificial intelligence without any restrictions on it. But it's a powerful tool.
If I could ask you, because I have some questions for the others, are you frightened of that combination?
No, I'm not.
Okay, thank you.
I'm very hopeful that we will work out a way to use it.
Thank you. I'm shifting gears now, and I'd like to ask just a little bit less than a minute on this from each of our other panelists, please. If innovation and a free market competitive environment is our goal, what is the proper role of government in achieving that in your industry, and what is a bridge too far? I'll start with Mr. Gillen. A little less than a minute, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman. Access to spectrum is number one for us, is empowering the FCC to auction spectrum, identifying spectrum for auction, and then letting the highest bidder win, and to take advantage of and then leverage that to deliver service for America. So that's the key for us. That's the input we need to make a difference.
Thank you. Mr. Assey?
I would say auction is one tool, but at a broader sense, it's making commercial spectrum available, using a balanced approach that includes all of the above, and also addressing the needs of government users and coordinating amongst the many different government agencies.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
I agree, and just stated maybe a different way, it's setting up the innovators for success. That means giving them the spectrum that they need. It means giving them processes that are coherent and final, and it means helping harmonize those bands globally.
Thank you. And to the panelists, just close with this comment. I'm not a veteran on this committee. I have had some experience in the technology sector and in academia, but I'm very sensitive, and I think we as a committee are very sensitive to where those boundaries are for regulation. So easily, sometimes we can stifle innovation and competitiveness. And so finding that happy medium, finding that place where it's necessary but encouraging to competition and innovation is where we're trying to be. Please help us get there. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Listen, this has been invaluable to me. I'm a new member as well, and I'm the other pharmacist on the panel, the youngest. You know, when reading Mr. Johnson's statement about China allocating spectrum, it caused me to look into a little deeper into 6G research, and I read an article that stated at the end of 2021, China's government had built the largest 5G mobile infrastructure in the world with 1.43 million base stations, accounting for over 60% of the global total. And it also stated that after having its 5G network up for a month, Beijing officially launched R&D into the 6G ahead of schedule. And this was probably the most frightening for me. It also stated that China has the most 6G patents in the world, and it has 40.3% of the 6G filings, mainly focused on 6G infrastructure. Now, this is a question for the whole panel. At the end of the day, America can they can sell all the spectrum in the world, but if we can't build our infrastructure out, it's worthless. So my question is, how important is permitting reform to ensuring that any newly released spectrum results in a better and more effective experience? And I guess we can start with you, Mr. Gillen.
Thank you. It's a really important question. And I think when you look at in China, if they want to deploy a cell tower, they do it that day.
That day.
There is no zoning, there is no anything, it just happens. That's not necessarily what we need to replicate, but we need to do faster here too.
Yeah.
Too many communities, it costs too much, it's too complex a process, and there's not timeframes involved to make sure the community's interests are addressed, but also to let us get out and build faster. It also goes to the power and the propagation of these signals, that there's some spectrum that just works better in rural areas than others, and we need to make sure we're focusing on those. And on your question about 6G, we have really smart engineers starting that conversation. Right now, we're in the first inning of 5G. This is really just the beginning of what we're doing. And so I think that we need to stay focused on 5G. There's absolutely the right engineers working towards what 6G future is. And you're exactly right in terms of patents, in terms of standards. Yeah. China's trying to take a leadership role, and we need to be aware of that. Mr. Johnson's call for warning on all those things is exactly right.
Well, let's hope the Senate watches this hearing so they'll get on the stick. Yes, sir, Mr. Assey.
No, I would agree with what Mr. Gillen said. I mean, spectrum is obviously an input, but really it's not, spectrum is only as good as the infrastructure it's going to ride over, and we have to be able to build infrastructure efficiently with government permitting as well. But it's actually much broader than that because, as Mr. Gillen said, if in China they can basically make it happen and put the pole up, you still have to get the pole attached, the wire attached to the pole. So there are a lot of other things that can impede our execution of actually following through and building on broadband, and permitting is one, access to poles is another, supply chain, and it goes on. So it's a very difficult problem we face, but in talking about spectrum, we should not lose focus on the need to execute on these strategies and actually build the infrastructure.
Absolutely. I don't even think deadlines would respond to deadlines, as Mr. Gillen said. Yes, Doc?
Yes, there's a lot of 6G initiatives happening already in the U.S. I'm part of the NextG Alliance that is already working on 6G standards. There's 6G interest groups in the National Spectrum Consortium. So I'm pretty comfortable that the U.S. is still in a leadership position on 6G. Going to infrastructure, I think that especially when you're talking about rural areas and underserved areas, to me, the fundamental problem of infrastructure there is one of lack of backhaul. You cannot get fiber fast enough to most places, so we have to start thinking about alternative ways of getting backhaul. Satellite is one. Fixed point-to-point links using, the high frequencies where there's a lot of bandwidth and others. So we have to, take a whole approach to spectrum and how it's best used to solve some of these problems.
Because we have to make decisions. I serve a rural area, and there's not broadband in a lot of the counties. And, we've struggled on how to do that temporarily, or do you do an infrastructure that's good for a long, long time? So I understand that. Yes, sir.
Same thing, yes, ma'am. And we presently live in Northeast Georgia, close to Tennessee.
You're right up my...
That's right.
Yeah, I get there in 4 hours.
We live in a little valley where I still have DSL internet.
Oh, my gosh. Son, you need to move.
It works okay, but it's, there are times where the layout of the mountains and the valleys is going to determine what works best.
It absolutely does.
As so many of my fellow witnesses have said, it takes different approaches and different topographies. And so particularly the BEAD program, the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law, needs to account for that. Not every valley is the same. So
no, I mean, East Tennessee is absolutely not like Chicago. Are you kidding?
And they all have to have broadband. Where we live, a lot of kids do their homework in the McDonald's parking lot. It's not okay, and it's not good. Back to my point, it's not good for national security if a big part of our country doesn't have access to the broadband.
I think he's tapping out. So with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired, and the gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all our witnesses for appearing before the committee here today. I think it's pretty clear it's essential for us to lead as the United States on spectrum policy to remain competitive, not just today, but for tomorrow as well. And I'm going to piggyback off of what my colleague from Tennessee was saying. So I represent North Florida, North Central Florida, the heart of the Sunshine State. And I also serve as a member of the House Ag Committee. So I'm optimistic about the role that spectrum, both licensed and unlicensed, can play to support efficient production through precision agriculture. So I'd like to direct this question to both Mr. Gillen and Mr. Assey. Can you speak to some of the current cases of spectrum in the agricultural production and future potential benefits in the sector? We'll start with you.
Thank you. It's one of the things we are excited about, the impact this can have on farming. I think to the conversation we just had, there has to be connectivity first.
Yes.
That we can have the best solutions in the world until there's connectivity. We don't need that. So we need to make sure there's spectrum available. In terms of actually what's happening in precision agriculture, we see a new wave of innovators seeing what 5G can do. Some of the AI capabilities that the doctor spoke about a minute ago, that Trellis is one in Georgia that is helping farmers stay on their land, helping drive yield, increasing irrigation, that gives those sensors, give them the tools to actually do their job in real time. And so we're seeing some of this first wave of innovators. In 4G, we saw the sharing economy, app economy. We saw all of those things happen on the 4G platform. 5G can do so much more in the enterprise space and to help businesses do their job. So we're just scratching the surface, but companies like Trellis give us a lot of encouragement. We're on the right path.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting area for innovation to kind of take hold, and it kind of goes to what I spoke in my testimony about the industry looking at not just getting broadband to the house, but really creating the cloud around which you live. We're going to use the BEAD program, and hopefully we're going to connect a lot of farmhouses, but we all want to be able to go beyond that farmhouse to cover the fields and to help the farmers provide the information, the technology that they're going to need in the modern age. And I think that there's no one solution. 5G will be a solution in some places. Unlicensed spectrum can be used to extend connectivity out of doors. And CBRS is a great example of where we can bring more people into this ecosystem and allow them to develop the solutions that best meet their own needs.
So I know this has been kind of touched on a couple different ways, but I think just to make it concise and clear, why is it so important that NCTA remain the sole manager of federal spectrum rather than separate independent management of agency spectrum? And we'll start here and go down the line.
I think what we saw in the C-band issue with deployment of 5G and FAA, the danger is that plays out in every sector of the economy, and therefore every regulator, every federal agency, we all have, and the further we get into the 5G era, the further we're going to be in an era where every sector has equities in spectrum. And we have to have coherent processes that determine how it's allocated. And once that process is finished, it needs to be finished. Whether it's federal with the NTIA or commercial with the FCC, we have to have processes that end and then deployment can begin.
Absolutely.
So the U.S. is the only country in the world that even has two agencies that regulate spectrum, one for commercial and one for federal. It's bad enough, right? And now if you take every agency that NTIA represents, and if they were all going to have a separate voice, it is just not manageable. So we have to be able to have a cohesive picture to the world. It makes the U.S. look very indecisive if we are not able to resolve, our own conflicts between spectrum domestically. So absolutely, it's absolutely essential that the NTIA is the only agency that represents the federal interests.
Thank you.
I don't think I can really add to that, but that we have a lot of federal users, and we need some way in the executive branch to coordinate the varying interests they have.
I agree with everything said. Just add the key to why it's important is certainty. If you're asking companies to spend billions of dollars on these assets, you need to know that what you actually bought, you're going to be able to use. And so having that one agency, or as Dr. correctly noted, we do have two, that we do that in a way that creates certainty across the ecosystem for both agencies and the commercial sector.
Absolutely. Thank you for making that point crystal clear. And thank you again to the chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gillen, I would like to start with you. First of all, let me thank you for delivering your comments extemporaneously and not merely reading. I feel like when we're having a hearing like this, we do a much better job being evocative with each other if we don't merely just read to each other. I just want to let you know that we notice and I appreciate it. You showed at the beginning of your testimony a graphic that I thought was really compelling, showing a 5 times increase in consumer demand for data by the year 2027, and that's a theme that's been echoed in the testimony that we've heard today. In fact, I think Mr. Assey referenced consumers' endless demand for data, is the way you put it. And I think that's an important discussion to have because as Congresswoman Clark mentioned when you and she were having a discussion, that really is what's driving the need for a more commercial spectrum, which is kind of underpinning the theme of today's hearing. But I want to ask you about that because I don't see why that should necessarily be true. If you look at the evolution of cellular data technology, we start with sending text to each other. That grows to graphics when we had the bandwidth to do that. That grew to photographs. And then recently, video is commonplace, and we don't even think twice about viewing a video or a sports game on a phone. But what I see in the generation after this is the explosion of technologies like AI. It's very, very exciting to me that hobbyists have succeeded in getting AI stacks similar to ChatGPT to run on cell phones. So that's going to be amazing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we need more data bandwidth to the device. So to what do you attribute this 5-fold increase in demand in the next couple of years?
Sure, a couple things, and it's a great question. The part of it is, as you alluded to, we just use these devices more and more every day. So as the device has more speeds and capabilities, we just use them more in a way that we didn't 2 or 3 years ago and continuing. What we're seeing with 5G is the proliferation of devices. It's not just this we are talking about. It's a lot of the sensors and other things we've talked about today, that this is the proliferation of devices, the Internet of Things we all talk about. This is the connectivity. Some of the connectivity is going to be 5G. Some of the connectivity is going to be unlicensed. But that we're going to see an explosion of demand as enterprises take advantage of this information and connectivity, that it's just going to be more and more devices talking to the network, not necessarily each individual device using infinitely more.
But just to play devil's advocate, we can only use one device at a time. So it's not like my refrigerator is going to watch the 49ers game, right? I'm watching it on my phone. I'm only doing it one. I might switch to my iPad, I might switch to my computer, might switch to my TV, but it's not clear to me that, my refrigerator is going to have that same appetite for data.
Absolutely, and I think we sort of talked about the precision agriculture example a little bit before. Those aren't using a lot of data, but those sensors are feeding data back in real time without our involvement at all. And so I think some of the things are the information, energy company using it to evaluate leaks in their system. There's going to be constant information flow coming. So absolutely, us individually as individuals, it's all the things that we're going to be empowering with this technology that really drive that usage.
All right. Continuing on that topic, Mr. Assey, we have been using this rise in demand for data as a reason why we need to allocate more spectrum to commercial use. However, at the same time, we're pursuing new technologies that make more efficient use of the spectrum that we already have. Things like better spectrum sharing, beamforming technologies, larger phased arrays antennas, that really potentially, especially in the 5G world, have a potential to be game changers. How much do you think of this increased demand those technologies can satisfy rather than needing more bandwidth?
I should probably defer to Dr. Ghosh.
I'll allow you to if you'd like to.
But I will make the one point, which is that, and it doesn't matter whether you're a wired network or a wireless network, we're both kind of hybrids of the same, but it's going to be in our interest to be able to push more data through the mediums that we have, because the alternative is to have to basically devote more capital to expanding and expanding and expanding. So there's a real market incentive for us to try to be more efficient, and that's why cable's next generation of technology, 10G technology, is going to be even more efficient than the ones we've seen previously.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is a discussion that obviously we're going to continue to have. Let's look forward to taking the first step, which is to regain FCC authority to actually auction spectrum. And fingers crossed that the Senate, they'll have another opportunity next week. John Dingell used to call them the Cave of Winds. I think they have an opportunity to prove him wrong. Let's hope they do it. I yield back.
Thank you. Well, next up, I'd like to recognize myself. I just so happened I came up to the chair, but it was my turn. Sorry, Mr. Pfluger, but thank you all for being here today. And the question, my first question is for the doctor. Representative Custer and I introduced a bill that would increase coordination between NCTA and FCC and require them to update their spectrum MOU regularly. I'm glad our bill was approved earlier this week during our subcommittee markup, and I'm hopeful this will help prevent future issues like we saw with C-band. I would like to start, and then also hear from other witnesses. Outside of regularly updating their MOU, do you have any recommendations, Doctor, on how the FCC, NCTA can improve coordination on its spectrum issues?
Thank you for that question. So I think one of the key points of debate that arise when you're talking about spectrum issues is the underlying technical reasons, assumptions. As I mentioned in my testimony, centers like Spectrum X actually have joint MOUs with the NTIA and the FCC. So we actually convene both agencies together to really talk about what are the fundamental technical issues that need to be discussed. I think more relations like that should be encouraged, along with more dialogue between the agencies directly. Involving the broader community can only help make these decisions proceed better.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Would anybody else on the panel like to add to that? Mr. Gillen?
I would really echo the doctor's comments. I think when you look, we want these folks to be our spectrum experts. They need the resources to do that. It's the ITS lab in Boulder. We need to empower these experts to be able to, one, to make the calls and that everyone trusts that process. So it's critical that we have the underlying research and capabilities.
Thank you. In your testimonies, many of you referred to the importance of spectrum pipeline and including the lower 3 gigahertz band in that pipeline. As you all know, and we've talked about it a little bit, the lower 3 is being used in Europe, China, and other countries across the globe for 5G.
but it is not being used for the purpose in the United States. Can any of the witnesses explain the benefits of the global harmonization of spectrum bands and why it's so important? Mr. Johnson?
Yes, sir. It bears repeating, I think, that if the United States can serve that band, it has global scale, then U.S. companies and allied-based companies that have large presence in the United States can compete and win. If we're not in that band, then China and Huawei, et cetera, have the advantage, and it's just that simple.
It is. I agree. Doctor, would you like to add?
Yes, so I think it's important to realize that economy scale are really important. And not being in that band, I would modify that statement a bit. I think pretty much all 5G technology that's being developed in the US is actually capable of operating in that band. They don't, because we don't have the license to do that. And I would reiterate that actually, if we can even develop ways of sharing in that band, that puts the US ahead. None of these other countries really have developed the sharing capabilities and expertise that the US has. And we should leverage that more, whether it's in the lower 3 or in other bands, to expand our capabilities.
Okay. Mr. Assey, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, we have challenges in that band from a governmental sense that other nations may not, so we have to work through them. But the most important thing is, can we focus on ways that we can make commercial spectrum available, and can we develop these types of sharing win-win solutions that will allow us to open the band up sooner rather than waiting to do it later.
Okay. Mr. Gillen, please.
It's a large block of spectrum. There's a lot of opportunities to both meet DoD's needs and meet the commercial needs. And that when we look, we need spectrum that, from a security reliability standpoint, is preemptible. A lot of the complex sharing we're doing today, the federal government takes precedent, and the commercial sector can't use it. So if we want spectrum we want to invest $35 billion a year in, we need to know we're going to be able to use it. And I think these experiments are really important for us going forward, but we also have to recognize the full power, non-preemptible spectrum is key to do a lot of the things we want to do too.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I'm going to stop right there and yield myself back. Next up, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for saving the best for last. And I appreciate all of your testimony and your written testimony. I'll apologize right now, Mr. Johnson, Dr. Ghosh. A lot of the questions that I was intending to ask you, I think have already been asked, and so I'm going to focus a little bit differently. And let me just ask for the two of you in the associations, that 3.1 to 3.7 gig range. A former Air Force pilot, spent a lot of time with spectrum, understand the dual use, the commercial versus the military very well. What are we competing against in the DoD side there that is, I don't want to get stuck on this one, but.
Sure. In terms of what the military is looking for, it's largely a radar band, both ground and air. So you have AWACS is a big user of that. And that's one of those, when you talk about a system that is ripe for advancement and innovation, it's one of those that we think the win-win situations come, is that we can get use Wedgetail to use different spectrum than they're using today, that we have some more opportunities to open it up. But at its core, 3.1 to 3.7 has been a radar band.
It's largely AI.
Yes.
Yeah. And you think that with the Wedgetail and with some of the other innovations, I mean, is there an opportunity to share it?
There's absolutely options to share. I think there's geographic sharing.
Yeah.
There's more complex sharing that we've heard about as well.
Okay.
I think it really comes down to, and what we find this committee is really helpful at, is system by system, engineer to engineer, what's the right solution? Some may retune, some move, some stay the same.
Very quickly, because I want to jump to another one.
And I was just going to say, and this is exactly what engineers like Dr. Ghosh are trying to sift through that path SS process.
Okay. It sounds like, from what I've heard and what I've read in your testimonies today, that there's kind of an all of the above approach. There's an auction that's needed. There's other approaches, licensed and unlicensed. And I'll just say, look, we've spent billions of dollars the last couple of years. And in an area like mine, where we are truly a national security area, we produce the most energy out of any geographic region in the entire country. We have a tremendous amount of agriculture, but the density of population is very, very low. And I find myself driving through my own district going, what happened, you know? And so how do we, you know, how do we get to the point where we actually do compete with China, where we're actually doing what we said we were going to do and provide that coverage to that last mile? This is 1930 with a lack of electricity in those farm houses. I mean, how do we do it? Because I'm worried about it.
Exactly right. I think part of it is spectrum, but as the panel has talked about, it gets down to infrastructure, and the cost in rural areas, it can be prohibitive. And so what's the role of government? The BEAD program is part of it. Right now, that's only going to be fiber, so it's not going to fix wireless or mobile wireless. The FCC promised a 5G fund in 2011, I believe. We still haven't gotten money dedicated to building out wireless in those really expensive areas. So it's really going to take a partnership between government and industry to really reach all of those Americans while we continue to push forward.
Because a lot of the, you know, we hear, well, this is for rural broadband, and this money was for rural broadband. And I'm like, I live in a rural area. Where's my broadband?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And the BEAD program provides us with a great opportunity. There's a lot of capital out there, but as you say, you know, we've kind of heard this before in the sense that money that is going to rural America never gets to rural America. And it's one of the reasons I think we have to stay laser focused on making sure that the capital that the government has provided is actually dedicated to those unserved and underserved areas that have been so long without infrastructure and where the economics to serve are so hard.
So am I to understand that the money has not been appropriated for those areas like Highway 158 between Garden City and Midland?
The program has, we have allocated the money, and we're in the process currently. The Department of Commerce is about to allocate that money further among the states, and then it will be up to the states to distribute those funds pursuant to the rules that the Department of Commerce has set. And, you know, I think Congress showed great leadership when it passed that legislation to make sure when we say unserved and underserved America, we mean it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And, you know, obviously this is a very, I believe a lot of what has been said today, we have to compete, we have to do it well, even in areas that may be more difficult and are not quite as economic to the companies that you represent. We still have to provide the coverage there because they're actually providing something that is in the public interest, and that is energy and food. And we want people to move to those areas, and without coverage, many of the families don't do it because their kids can't learn, you know, in the school settings, or their spouses can't work, they're remote. So I'm very worried about that. I appreciate y'all being here and going through the end. I think we're starting a second round of questions here shortly. I'll yield back, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pfluger, for your humor also. All members have been recognized. Seeing there are no further members wishing to be recognized, I would like to thank all of the witnesses today for being here. Promise you don't have another round of questioning. I ask unanimous consent to insert the record the documents included on the staff hearing document list. Without objection, that will be the order. You go. Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to committee rules, I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record and ask the witnesses to respond to the questions promptly. Members should submit their questions by the close of business on March 24th. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.